The gun pressed against Elena's temple felt colder than the rain outside. She'd seen this man before, in nightmares that still made her wake up screaming. Now he sat across from her in a police interrogation room, handcuffed, smiling like he'd already won. "You think you escaped me?" he whispered. "You were never free." But what he didn't know was that the man standing behind the two-way mirror, the one whose ring matched hers, had spent 20 years searching for her. And Victor Moreau didn't forgive. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The fluorescent lights in Murphy's diner buzzed like dying wasps, casting everything in a sickly yellow that made the grease stains on the walls look worse than they were. Elena Cross moved between tables with the mechanical efficiency of someone who'd stopped caring about tips 3 years ago. Her feet ached in shoes held together with duct tape and determination. The clock above the register read 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until her shift ended. 13 minutes until she could walk the 6 blocks to her apartment, lock 3 deadbolts, and pretend the world outside didn't exist. "Coffee's cold," a truck driver grunted, pushing his cup toward her without looking up from his phone. Elena grabbed the pot from the burner and poured. Her hands moved automatically. Pour, smile, move on. Don't think, don't feel, don't remember. But the ring on her right hand caught the light as she set the pot down, and for a moment, she couldn't help but stare at it. Silver, worn smooth in places, with an inscription she'd never been able to fully decipher. The only thing her mother had left her. The only proof Elena had ever been anyone's daughter. "You gonna stand there all night?" Elena blinked. "Sorry. Anything else?" The driver waved her off. She moved to the next table, then the next, her mind already counting. $47 in tips tonight. Rent was due in 4 days. She was 200 short, and that was before factoring in the electricity bill that had turned red 2 weeks ago. The bell above the door chimed. Elena didn't look up immediately. Tuesday nights were slow, just the regulars and the occasional long-haul driver looking for coffee and a place to sit that wasn't their cab. But something made her glance toward the entrance, some animal instinct that tightened the muscles in her shoulders. 3 men walked in. They moved like they owned the air they breathed. The first 2 were large, built like concrete barriers in expensive suits that didn't quite hide the bulges under their jackets. But it was the third man who made Elena's hand freeze halfway to a dirty plate. He was maybe 45, with dark hair threaded with silver, and eyes that swept the diner like he was calculating every exit, every potential threat, every weakness in the room. His suit probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. He carried himself with the kind of absolute confidence that came from knowing no one would dare tell him no. Victor Moreau. Elena didn't know his name yet, but she knew the type. She'd spent enough years running from men like him to recognize danger when it walked through the door. "Sit anywhere," she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. The 3 men chose a booth near the back. Elena watched them from the corner of her eye as she cleared table 5. The 2 large men sat on one side, flanking their boss protectively. Victor sat alone across from them, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Old Pete, working the grill, caught her attention. "You want me to take that table?" Pete was 63 with a bad knee and worse lungs. He'd already worked a double shift. "I got it," Elena said. She grabbed 3 menus and approached the booth, her server smile fixed in place. "Evening. Coffee?" "Please," Victor said. His voice was smooth, controlled, with an accent she couldn't quite place. "And water for my associates." Up close, Elena noticed details she'd missed from across the room. A scar along his jawline, barely visible, cufflinks that caught the light, real gold probably, and on his right hand, a ring, silver, worn smooth, with an inscription. Elena's blood turned to ice. The menu slipped from her fingers and hit the table with a clatter. She grabbed it quickly, but not before Victor's eyes narrowed, tracking her movement. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Fine, sorry, long shift." Elena's mind raced. It couldn't be. The ring on his hand, it was identical to hers. Not similar. Identical. Down to the pattern of wear, the way the silver had thinned near the inscription. She forced herself to step back. "I'll get that coffee." Her hands shook as she poured. This was insane. Rings could look alike. People wore jewelry that resembled other jewelry all the time. There was no reason to think, but she couldn't stop seeing it. The exact same piece her mother had left her. The only connection Elena had to a woman who died when Elena was too young to remember her face. "You okay, hun?" Pete asked, watching her spill coffee onto the counter. "Yeah, just tired." She cleaned up the spill and carried the pot back to the booth. As she poured Victor's coffee, she couldn't help but look at his hand again. The ring sat on his right hand, third finger, same as hers. Victor noticed her staring. His expression shifted, became unreadable. "Is there something you need?" he asked quietly. Elena's throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to keep her head down, to survive the way she'd always survived, by being invisible. But something deeper, something she'd buried under years of fear and learned helplessness, made her speak. "Your ring," she said. Her voice came out hoarse. "Where did you get it?" The temperature in the booth dropped 10 degrees. The two large men straightened, their hands moving subtly toward their jackets. Victor held up one finger, and they froze. "That's an interesting question," Victor said slowly. His eyes locked onto Elena's face with an intensity that made her want to run. "Why do you ask?" Elena's heart hammered. This was stupid. This was dangerous. This was... She held up her right hand. The ring caught the light, silver and worn and impossibly familiar. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Victor stared at her hand like she'd pulled a grenade. The color drained from his face. One of his men started to rise, but Victor's hand shot out, gripping the table edge hard enough to make his knuckles white. "Where did you get that?" His voice had changed. Still controlled, but something raw lived underneath it now. "It was my mother's," Elena whispered. "Your mother's name." It wasn't a question. It was a command. "I don't know. I was..." Elena swallowed hard. "I was found in an alley when I was 3 years old. No ID, no records, just this ring and a social worker who said my mother was probably dead." Victor stood up so fast the booth shook. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and suddenly the diner felt too small, the air too thin. His men flanked him immediately, but he ignored them, his entire focus on Elena. "Take it off," he said. "What?" "The ring. Take it off. Now." Elena's fingers moved to protect it automatically. "No, it's mine. It's all I..." "There's an inscription," Victor cut her off. "Inside the band. Read it to me." Elena's breath caught. She'd tried to read the inscription 1,000 times, but it was worn almost smooth. Just fragments remained, letters that might have been words once. "I can't read it anymore," she said. "It's too worn." Victor pulled his ring off with shaking hands. He held it up to the light, turning it so she could see the inside of the band. Even from 2 feet away, Elena could make out the engraving, Amour Eternel, V&L, 2000, to Eternal Love, V&L, 2002. "Louise," Victor said, and his voice cracked on the name. "Her name was Louise Martin. We were engaged. She disappeared 23 years ago. They told me she was dead. They told me there was nothing left to find." The diner spun. Elena grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "That's impossible," she managed. "I'm 23. If she disappeared 23 years ago, you would have been an infant." Victor's eyes were bright with something Elena couldn't name. "She was pregnant when she vanished. 3 months. I thought..." He stopped, his jaw working. "I thought I'd lost them both." The truck driver at table 7 was staring now. Pete had stopped pretending to clean the grill. The whole diner had gone silent, everyone watching this scene unfold like they'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. Elena shook her head. No, this doesn't make sense. My mother died. They told me she died." "Who told you?" Victor took a step closer. His men moved with him, a unit. "Who told you she was dead?" "The orphanage, St. Catherine's Home for Children. They said I was found alone, that she'd probably overdosed or..." Elena's voice broke. She'd told herself that story so many times it had become truth. A mother who hadn't wanted her. A mother who died in an alley somewhere, unmourned and unmissed. But Victor was shaking his head, and the look on his face was pure rage. "St. Catherine's," he repeated. "In Dover Heights?" Elena nodded numbly. "That place was shut down 8 years ago. Federal investigation. Human trafficking. illegal adoptions. Victor's hands curled into fists. They sold children. The words hit Elena like physical blows. She remembered St. Catherine's. She remembered cold floors and locked doors, and Sister Margaret's voice hissing that unwanted children should be grateful for the roof over their heads. She remembered being 6 years old and watching a girl named Amy disappear in the middle of the night, never to return. She remembered asking where Amy went and getting slapped hard enough to knock a tooth loose. "I need to sit down," Elena heard herself say. Victor pulled out a chair. She collapsed into it, her legs suddenly useless. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. "What's your name?" Victor asked, crouching beside her chair so they were eye level. "Elena Cross was the name they gave me at the orphanage. Elena." Victor tested the word, and something that might have been grief flickered across his face. "Louise wanted to name our daughter Elena if we had a girl. She said it meant light." The room tilted again. Elena pressed her palm flat against the table, trying to anchor herself to something solid. "I need proof," she said. This is insane. You can't just show up and say you're my father because we have matching rings." "You're right." Victor stood, pulling out his phone. He made a call, spoke in rapid French to whoever answered. Elena caught fragments. DNA test immediately, private lab, results by morning. He hung up and looked at her. "There's a lab 3 blocks from here. They're opening it for us. We can do the test tonight. I'm working." "Not anymore." Victor pulled out his wallet and extracted a stack of bills. He walked to the counter and set them down in front of Pete. "For her time and any inconvenience." Pete stared at what had to be at least $2,000. "That's not necessary, sir." "It's necessary to me." Elena stood on shaking legs. "I can't just leave in the middle of my shift." "Elena." Victor turned back to her, and for the first time, she saw past the control and the power to something almost desperate underneath. "I spent 23 years thinking the woman I loved was dead, thinking our child was dead. If there's even a chance—" He stopped, visibly composing himself. "Please, just give me tonight." Every warning bell in Elena's head screamed at her to refuse. Strange men with guns and money were never good news. She'd learned that lesson young, and learned it hard. But the ring on her finger felt warm against her skin, and somewhere deep in a place she'd locked away, a small voice whispered, "What if?" "Okay," she heard herself say. "Okay." The lab was exactly 3 blocks away, in a building that looked like it had been expensive once and never quite recovered from falling out of fashion. A woman in a white coat met them at the door, her expression carefully neutral despite the fact that it was past midnight. "Mr. Moreau," she said, "everything's ready." The test took 15 minutes. A swab in Elena's mouth, a vial of blood from Victor's arm, labels and paperwork that the technician handled with efficient speed. "Results in 6 hours," the woman said. "I'll call you directly." "Make it 3, Victor said. "Sir, the processing time, 3 hours. Victor handed her another stack of bills. "I'm sure you can find a way." They left the lab in silence. Victor's car was parked illegally in front of the diner, a black Mercedes that probably cost more than Elena would make in a decade. His men had disappeared somewhere, which should have made her feel safer, but somehow didn't. "Can I drive you home?" Victor asked. "I can walk. It's almost 1 in the morning. I walk home at 1 in the morning every night." Elena pulled her jacket tighter. The November air bit through the cheap material. "I've been doing it for 3 years. I'll be fine." Victor looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression must have stopped him. "Then let me walk with you." "Why?" "Because if the test confirms what I think it will, I've spent 23 years not protecting my daughter. I'd like to start now, even if it's just 6 blocks. Elena wanted to say no, wanted to run back to her apartment and lock the doors and pretend tonight had never happened. But the exhaustion was bone deep now, and honestly, she was too tired to argue. "Fine," she said. They walked in silence for the first 2 blocks. The streets were empty except for a few late-night stragglers and a homeless man sleeping in a doorway. Elena's neighborhood wasn't dangerous exactly, but it wasn't safe either. She'd learned to walk fast, keep her head down, and never look like a victim. Victor walked like someone who'd never been afraid of a dark street in his life. "Tell me about yourself," he said when they turned onto Maple Avenue. "Why?" "Because I want to know. If you're—" He paused. "If the test comes back positive, I've missed 23 years. I'd like to understand who you are." Elena laughed, the sound harsh. "I'm nobody. I work at a diner. I live in a 500-square-foot apartment with water damage and a landlord who steals from the security deposit. I have $300 in my bank account and about $50,000 in student debt from a degree I never finished. That's it. That's my whole life." "Why didn't you finish?" "Money ran out. Scholarships don't cover everything, and I couldn't work enough hours to pay for school and rent at the same time." Elena shoved her hands in her pockets. "I made it 2 years into a psychology degree before I had to choose between tuition and eating. Eating won." Victor was quiet for a moment. "You wanted to be a psychologist?" "I wanted to help kids." The words came out before Elena could stop them. "Kids like me, the ones who fall through the cracks, the ones nobody gives a damn about." "Someone gave a damn about you." Elena stopped walking. They were in front of her building now, a 4-story brick structure that had seen better decades. "No, they didn't. The orphanage kept me because they got money from the state. The foster families I bounced through kept me for the same reason. Nobody wanted Elena Cross. They wanted the check that came with her." Victor's expression hardened. "The orphanage, St. Catherine's. What do you remember about it?" Elena's hands curled into fists. "Why?" "Because if you're my daughter, someone took you. Someone took Louise and—" He stopped, his voice rough. "Someone did something terrible, and I need to know what you remember." The memories Elena had spent years trying to bury clawed their way to the surface. Cold floors, dark rooms, children crying, and him, the man with the smile that never reached his eyes. "Director Morrison?" she whispered. "He ran St. Catherine's. I remember he used to come into the dormitory at night. He'd choose one of us and—" Elena's throat closed. She couldn't say the rest. Victor's entire body went rigid. "Did he ever touch you?" "Not like that, but he touched some of the others. And some kids disappeared. Amy, Tommy, a boy whose name I never learned. They'd be there one day and gone the next. And when we asked, Sister Margaret would say they'd been adopted by good families. But I heard her once, talking to Morrison. She said something about overseas buyers." The silence that followed was absolute. When Elena looked up, Victor's face was a mask of carefully controlled fury. "Do you know what happened to Morrison?" he asked, his voice deadly quiet. "He disappeared when they shut the orphanage down. The feds couldn't find him. They said he probably fled the country." They were wrong. Victor pulled out his phone and made another call, this one brief and in a language Elena didn't recognize. He hung up and looked at her. "Get inside. Lock your doors. I'll have someone watching your building until we get the test results." "You're leaving?" "I have work to do." The expression on his face made Elena's blood run cold. "If what you've told me is true, if Morrison did what I think he did, then I need to have a conversation with some people." Elena should have been scared, should have run, but instead she found herself asking, "What kind of work do you do, Victor?" He smiled, and it was the kind of smile that promised violence. "I solve problems that the law can't touch." And Elena, he paused on the step below hers, bringing them to eye level. "If you're mine, if someone took you and hurt you, there isn't a hole deep enough for them to hide in." Then he was gone, disappearing into a car that materialized out of the darkness like a shadow made solid. Elena stood on the steps of her building for a long time, her heart racing. She should go inside, should lock the doors and pretend tonight had been a bad dream. Instead, she pulled out her phone and searched. Victor Moreau. The results made her stomach drop. Victor Moreau. Alleged crime lord suspected of running one of the largest illegal operations on the East Coast. Money laundering, racketeering, suspected connections to several unsolved murders. Never convicted, always a step ahead of the law. Elena scrolled through article after article, her hands shaking. If he was her father, if the test came back positive, what did that make her? But underneath the fear was something else, something darker and older. A memory of being 6 years old in St. Catharines, watching Morrison walk past with his terrible smile. She'd wished then that someone would make him disappear, had prayed for someone strong enough to stop him. Maybe she'd gotten her wish, just 20 years too late. Elena went inside and locked her 3 deadbolts. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window and watched the street below, where a black sedan had parked with a clear view of her building. Victor had meant it about the protection. At 4:47 a.m., her phone rang. "The results are in," Victor said without preamble. "Can I come up?" Elena's mouth went dry. "What do they say?" "I'd rather tell you in person." She gave him the address he already clearly had and buzzed him in when he rang. The climb to the 4th floor took less than a minute. Then he was standing in her doorway, and Elena couldn't read his expression at all. "Well?" she asked. Victor handed her a folder. Inside was a single page of dense text and numbers that meant nothing to her, until her eyes caught the conclusion at the bottom. Probability of paternity. 99.98% Elena's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, the paper trembling in her hands. "You're sure?" she whispered. "I'm sure." Victor crouched beside her, and his voice was gentle in a way that made her chest ache. "Elena Cross, you're my daughter, and I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner." Elena started to cry. She couldn't help it. 23 years of wondering who she was, where she came from, why nobody had wanted her, and here was the answer. She wasn't unwanted. She'd been stolen. Victor didn't try to hug her or comfort her. He just sat on the floor beside her and waited while she sobbed out 2 decades of grief and rage and loneliness. When she finally stopped, her face was swollen and her throat raw. "What happens now?" she asked. Victor's expression hardened. "Now we find out who took you, who killed Louise, and we make them pay." "The police?" "The police had their chance. St. Catharines was supposed to be investigated thoroughly. Morrison was supposed to be caught." Victor's voice was cold steel. "They failed. I won't." Elena looked at this man, her father, and saw something familiar in his eyes. The same rage she'd carried for years, the same need for justice that had driven her to want to save other broken children. "I want to help," she said. "No." "You don't get to say no, not after 23 years. Elena stood, and despite the fact that she was 6 inches shorter and probably 70 pounds lighter, she met his gaze without flinching. "Someone took my mother from me. Someone stole my entire life. I deserve to be part of this." Victor studied her for a long moment. "You don't know what you're asking. I know exactly what I'm asking. I grew up in hell. I survived it. I'm not scared of getting my hands dirty if it means making sure no other kid has to go through what I did." Something that might have been pride flickered across Victor's face. "You're Louise's daughter," he said quietly. She was fearless, too. "Tell me about her." So he did. They sat on Elena's ratty couch as dawn broke over the city, and Victor told her about Louise Martin, how they'd met at a charity gala, how she'd called him on his bullshit within 5 minutes of meeting him, how she'd worked as a nurse in the ER and came home with stories that made him rage about the injustice of the world, how she'd looked at him one night and said she was pregnant, and he'd known in that instant that everything in his life had just changed, and how she'd disappeared 3 weeks later, vanished between her shift at the hospital and home like she'd never existed at all. "I tore the city apart looking for her," Victor said, his voice rough. "Called in every favor, threatened everyone I could threaten. Found nothing. It was like she'd been erased." "And you think Morrison had something to do with it?" "I think someone with resources took her, someone who knew how to hide their tracks. St. Catharines didn't operate in a vacuum. They had to have protection, people turning a blind eye." Victor's hands clenched. "Morrison is the key. Find him, and we find the truth." Elena touched the ring on her finger, the one her mother had worn. "Then let's find him," I said. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of information and planning. Victor set Elena up in a hotel suite that cost more per night than she made in a month. His people brought her clothes that actually fit, food that didn't come from a microwave, and a laptop with encrypted access to databases she probably shouldn't have been able to see. They also brought files, hundreds of them, St. Catherine's had officially shut down 8 years ago after a federal raid uncovered evidence of illegal adoptions and child trafficking. 23 children had been recovered. Director James Morrison had vanished hours before the raid, along with Sister Margaret Brennan and 2 other staff members. The FBI had opened an investigation. It had gone cold within 6 months. Elena read every report, studied every photo. She recognized some of the children in the pictures. They'd been younger than her, babies and toddlers, when she'd already been old enough to remember their faces. Most had been returned to family members or placed in foster care. None of them could provide information about where Morrison had gone. "He had help," Elena said on the 3rd night, looking up from a file on her laptop. Someone with enough power to hide him and 4 other people completely. Victor, sitting across from her with his own stack of documents, nodded. "I've been working on that angle. St. Catherine's received significant donations from several shell companies over the years. I'm tracking them back to their sources. Any luck?" "Some." Victor handed her a printed page. 3 of the companies trace back to a man named Dmitry Volkov, Russian oligarch with interests in shipping and real estate, also suspected of human trafficking, but nothing's ever been proven. Elena's blood ran cold. "You think he was buying children from Morrison?" "I think Morrison was providing a service, and Volkov was paying for it. The question is whether your mother stumbled onto something she shouldn't have seen." "She was a nurse," Elena said slowly. "ER nurse. What if she treated someone, a kid who'd been hurt maybe, or someone involved in the trafficking network?" Victor's expression sharpened. "That's good thinking. I'll have my people pull ER records from the hospital she worked at, cross-reference with St. Catherine's admissions." He made a call. Elena went back to the files, but her mind kept circling back to one question. If her mother had seen something, had tried to help, what had they done to her? The ring on her finger felt heavier than it should have. At midnight, Victor's phone rang. He listened for 30 seconds, then hung up, and looked at Elena with an expression that made her pulse spike. "They found something," he said. "Louise treated a 7-year-old girl 2 days before she disappeared. The girl had been beaten badly. Broken ribs, fractured skull. Louise reported it as suspected abuse. Child Services was called." "Let me guess," Elena said, her voice hollow. "The girl came from St. Catherine's. Her name was Amy Reeves." The world stopped. Elena knew that name. Amy, the girl who disappeared from the dormitory when Elena was 6, the first one she remembered vanishing. "Morrison took her back," Elena whispered. "My mother tried to save her, and Morrison took them both." Victor's voice was cold with rage. Amy must have told Louise where she came from. Louise would have started asking questions, looking into St. Catherine's, and Morrison couldn't let that happen. Elena stood up, her hands shaking. "Where's Amy now? Is she alive?" "We're looking, but Elena—" Victor stood too, his expression serious. "If we're right, if Morrison took your mother because she was a threat, then he didn't just take you. He killed her. And there's a good chance he killed Amy too." The words should have broken her, should have sent her to her knees, but instead, Elena felt something cold and hard crystallize in her chest. "Then we find proof," she said, "and we make him pay." Victor studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Tomorrow, I'm meeting with someone who might know where Morrison is hiding. You can come, but you have to follow my lead. No questions, no interference. Understood?" "Understood." They left at dawn. The meeting was in a warehouse in the industrial district, the kind of place where bad things happened and nobody asked questions. Victor's men cleared the building first, then gave the signal. Inside, a man was tied to a chair in the center of the empty space. He was maybe 50, balding, with the soft build of someone who'd spent their life behind a desk. Blood ran from his nose and his left eye was swollen shut. Elena's stomach turned. "Who is he?" she asked quietly. "Gerald Hicks," Victor said. "Former accountant for St. Catherine's. He disappeared the same time Morrison did, but got sloppy 6 months ago. We found him living in Baltimore under a fake name." Victor walked toward Hicks slowly, and Elena followed. Up close, she could see the man trembling, his good eye wide with terror. "Mr. Hicks," Victor said pleasantly, "I'd like you to meet someone. This is Elena Cross. though she was born Elena Martine. Hicks's face went gray. I don't know what you're talking about. No? Victor pulled out a photo and held it in front of Hicks's face. That's Louise Martine, my fiancée. She disappeared 23 years ago while pregnant with our daughter. You were working at St. Catherine's at the time. You processed the paperwork when a 3-year-old girl was brought in. No birth certificate, no records, just a ring and a fake story about being found in an alley. I don't... Victor grabbed Hicks by the throat, cutting off his words. Don't insult my intelligence. You're going to tell me exactly what happened to Louise Martine. You're going to tell me where Morrison is. And if you're very cooperative and very lucky, you might live long enough to see a courtroom. He released Hicks, who gasped for air. You're insane, Hicks, Hicks wheezed. I want a lawyer. You think you get a lawyer? Victor laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You sold children. You helped murder a woman and destroy her daughter's life. You don't get lawyers. You get me. Elena stepped forward before she could stop herself. Where's Amy Reeves? Hicks's good eye flickered to her, then away. Amy Reeves, Elena repeated, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. 7 years old, beaten almost to death. My mother tried to save her. Where is she? I don't know who that is. Victor's hand moved so fast Elena almost missed it. The crack of impact echoed through the warehouse. Hicks's head snapped to the side, blood spraying from his mouth. Wrong answer, Victor said. She's dead, Hicks shouted, spitting teeth. She's dead, all right? Morrison killed her after your girlfriend started asking questions. Happy now? The confirmation hit Elena like a sledgehammer. Amy was dead. The little girl with blonde braids who used to share her crackers at lunch was dead, had been dead for 23 years. And my mother? Elena asked, surprised at how calm her voice sounded. Hicks laughed, a broken, hysterical sound. You really want to know? Morrison had her for 3 days before she died. 3 days to make her tell him who else she'd talked to, what evidence she'd gathered. She lasted longer than most. He had to get creative. Victor moved before Elena could react, his fist connecting with Hicks's face once, twice, 3 times. The accountant's chair tipped backward, hitting the concrete with a sickening crack. Victor, Elena said quietly. Stop. He froze, his fist raised for another blow. Blood covered his knuckles. I need him to talk, Elena continued, walking to stand beside Hicks's fallen form. I need to know where Morrison is. Beating him to death doesn't help me. Victor lowered his hand slowly. After a moment, he nodded and stepped back. Elena crouched beside Hicks, who was groaning, barely conscious. Listen to me very carefully, she said, her voice soft. My father is a crime lord. He has resources, money, and absolutely nothing to lose. If you don't tell us where Morrison is, he will keep you alive for months, maybe years, and every single day will be worse than the one before. She leaned closer. But if you cooperate, if you tell us everything, I'll make sure you get a deal. Federal protection, a new identity, a chance to disappear. You'll spend some time in prison, but you'll live. That's more mercy than you deserve, and it's more than you'll get if you stay silent. Hicks's good eye focused on her. You're bluffing. I'm my father's daughter. Do I look like I'm bluffing? The silence stretched. Then Hicks started talking. He told them about Morrison's network, about Volkov and the buyers in Eastern Europe. He told them about the children, 67 in total over 15 years, who'd been sold to the highest bidder. He told them about Louise, about how Morrison had kept her in the basement of an abandoned church, how she'd died fighting, how they dumped her body in the river and filed off her fingerprints to prevent identification. And he told them where Morrison was hiding. A compound in upstate New York, owned by Volkov through a series of shell companies. Morrison ran it now, still selling children, still destroying lives, protected by money and men with guns. When Hicks finished, Elena stood. Her legs felt numb. Her whole body felt numb. Get him out of here, Victor told his men. Turn him over to the FBI. Tell them everything he just said and make sure he gets full immunity in exchange for testimony. Boss, do it! Victor's tone left no room for argument. As Hicks was dragged away, Elena walked to the warehouse door and stared out at the sunrise painting the sky pink and gold. Victor came to stand beside her. "Are you all right?" he asked. "My mother died in a basement," Elena said quietly. "Alone, in pain, probably terrified. And I never knew. I spent 23 years thinking she'd abandoned me, and she died trying to protect children she didn't even know." "She died trying to protect you," Victor corrected gently. "If she'd talked, if she'd told Morrison about our relationship, he would have come after you immediately. She kept silent to keep you safe." Elena's eyes burned. "I want to finish this. I want to make sure Morrison never hurts another child. Then that's what we'll do." They drove back to the hotel in silence. But instead of going to her room, Elena followed Victor to his. He had maps spread across every surface, satellite photos of the compound Hicks had described, files on Volkov and Morrison both. "I'm going to contact the FBI," Victor said, studying the photos. "Give them Hicks's testimony and the location of the compound. They can raid it, arrest Morrison, and everyone involved. That's not enough." Victor looked up. "Elena, they might not find all the evidence. Morrison might cut a deal. He might disappear again." Elena's hands clenched into fists. "I want to be there when they take him down. I want to look him in the eye and make sure he knows exactly who I am." "That's too dangerous." "I don't care. I care." Victor's voice rose. "You're my daughter. I just found you. I'm not going to put you in the middle of a federal raid where you could get killed." "You don't get to decide that for me," Elena shouted back. "This is my life, my trauma, my mother's death. I deserve to be part of ending it." They stared at each other, the tension crackling between them like electricity. Finally, Victor's shoulders sagged. "You're just like her," he said quietly. "Louise would have said the exact same thing. Is that a yes?" Victor closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were filled with a resigned kind of determination. "I'll make a call. The FBI has been trying to bring down Volkov for years. If we give them Morrison and proof of the trafficking network, they'll move fast. But you stay behind me at all times. You wear a vest. And if I tell you to run, you run. Understood?" "Understood." He made the call. Within an hour, they were sitting across from FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen, who listened to their information with an expression that shifted from skepticism to shock to grim satisfaction. "We've been investigating Volkov for 3 years, she said when Victor finished, "but we could never get enough evidence to move. If Hicks's testimony is legitimate," "It is," Victor said flatly. "I'm turning him over to you with full immunity in exchange for his cooperation." Chen's eyes narrowed. "And you expect nothing in return?" "I expect you to do your job. Raid the compound, arrest Morrison, and shut down the trafficking network permanently." "We'll need time to prepare, Shay." "You have 24 hours, Victor interrupted. "After that, I'm handling this my way. Mr. Moreau, I can't allow— I'm not asking permission." Victor stood. "Morrison has been free for 8 years. He's killed children, destroyed families, and lived without consequences. That ends now, with you or without you." He walked out. Elena followed, but Chen's voice stopped her at the door. "Miss Cross? A word?" Elena turned. Chen stood, her expression sympathetic. "I know who you are," the agent said quietly. "I read the St. Catherine's files when we were investigating. I know what you went through there." Elena's throat tightened. "Then you know why I have to see this through." "I do, but Victor Moreau is a dangerous man. He's under investigation for multiple felonies. Getting close to him, letting him use you to settle his own vendetta, it could destroy your life." "My life was already destroyed," Elena said. "I'm just trying to rebuild it with the truth." She left before Chen could respond. The raid happened 36 hours later. The FBI moved fast, assembling a task force and coordinating with local law enforcement. Victor made good on his word, turning Hicks over along with mountains of financial records his people had pulled from St. Catherine's old files. Elena watched from the FBI command post as Chen and her team prepared to move on the compound. She wore a bulletproof vest that was too big for her and had an earpiece that fed her constant updates. Victor stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "Teams in position. a voice crackled through the radio. Ready to breach on your command. Chen looked at Victor, then at Elena. Last chance to back out. We're not backing out, Elena said. Chen nodded and keyed her mic. All teams go, go, go. The next 20 minutes were chaos. Radio chatter, shouting, the sound of doors being kicked in and people screaming. Elena gripped the edge of the desk in front of her, her heart racing. Suspect in custody, came the call. We have Morrison. Repeat, we have James Morrison in custody. Elena's knees went weak. After 8 years, they had him. I want to see him, she said. Elena, Victor started. I need to see him, please. Chen hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. That's all I can give you. They drove to the compound in a convoy of FBI vehicles. The place was smaller than Elena had expected, just a main house and 2 outbuildings surrounded by a chain-link fence. Agents swarmed the property, bringing out suspects in handcuffs and carrying boxes of evidence. Morrison was in the back of an FBI van, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked older than Elena remembered, grayer and thinner, but those eyes, cold and calculating, were exactly the same. Chen opened the van door. You have 5 minutes. Elena climbed in. Morrison's eyes tracked her movement, and after a moment, recognition flickered across his face. Elena Cross, he said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, patronizing. All grown up. How unexpected. You remember me. I remember all my children. You were one of the difficult ones, always asking questions, always causing problems. He smiled. I should have sold you overseas when I had the chance. Elena sat down across from him. You killed my mother. Did I? Morrison tilted his head. So many people have died over the years, it's hard to keep track. You'll have to be more specific. Louise Martin. You kidnapped her, tortured her for 3 days, then dumped her body in the river. Morrison's smile widened. Ah, yes, the nurse. She had quite the mouth on her. Very self-righteous. Thought she could save everyone. He leaned forward. I made her suffer, you know. Made sure her last thoughts were of how she'd failed to protect those children. Failed to protect you. The rage Elena had been holding back for days exploded. She lunged forward, her fist connecting with Morrison's face before anyone could stop her. He fell backward, blood streaming from his nose. Hands grabbed Elena, pulling her out of the van. Victor had her by the shoulders, and Agent Chen was shouting something, but Elena couldn't hear over the roaring in her ears. He killed her, Elena screamed. He killed my mother and Amy and all those other children, and he's sitting there smiling. I know, Victor said quietly, holding her as she struggled. I know, but this isn't how we end him. This isn't justice. I don't want justice. I want him to hurt the way he hurt her. If you hurt him now, you become what he is. You lose everything, and he wins. Victor turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. Your mother died protecting children. Honor that. Help make sure he never hurts another one. The fight drained out of Elena. She sagged against Victor, exhausted and broken and so angry she could barely breathe. He confessed, she whispered. When I mentioned my mother, he confessed to killing her. Victor's expression sharpened. He looked at Chen, who was standing nearby with her hand on her sidearm. You heard that? He asked. I did. Chen keyed her radio. Get a recording team down here. Our suspect just confessed to murder. Morrison was shouting now, realizing what he'd done, but it was too late. Elena's 5 minutes had given them exactly what they needed. The next week blurred together. Hicks's testimony, combined with Morrison's confession and the evidence seized from the compound, built an airtight case. The FBI arrested 17 people connected to the trafficking network, including Dmitry Volkov himself, who tried to flee the country and was stopped at the airport. Elena spent hours being interviewed, first by the FBI, then by prosecutors preparing for trial. She told them everything she remembered about St. Catherine's, about Morrison, about the children who'd disappeared. It was exhausting, it was necessary, but it was also closure. On the 8th day after Morrison's arrest, Victor came to her hotel room with news. They found her, he said quietly. Elena's heart stopped. My mother? The FBI searched the river where Hicks said they dumped her body. found skeletal remains that match Louise's dental records. Victor's voice was thick with emotion. She's been identified. They're releasing her remains to us for burial. Elena couldn't speak. After 23 years, her mother was coming home. The funeral was small, just Elena, Victor, and a handful of people who'd known Louise before she died. They buried her in a cemetery overlooking the ocean, with a headstone that read, Louise Martin, beloved fiancée, mother and hero. Elena stood at the grave long after everyone else left, staring at the name carved in stone. "I'm sorry I didn't know you," she said quietly. "I'm sorry I spent so many years angry at you for leaving. You didn't leave, you fought, and I promise I'll make sure your fight meant something." She felt Victor's presence behind her before he spoke. "She would have been so proud of you," he said. "How do you know?" "Because I am." They stood in silence, two people bound by loss and love and a shared need for justice. Behind them, the ocean rolled in endless waves, and somewhere in the distance a child laughed. Morrison's trial was set for 3 months from now. Elena would testify. She would look him in the eye and tell the world what he'd done. But for now she let herself grieve, let herself feel the weight of everything she'd lost and everything she'd found. She had a father. She had proof that her mother had loved her. And she had a purpose. The rest would come. The courthouse steps were slick with rain 3 months later when Elena arrived for the first day of Morrison's trial. She'd barely slept the night before, her mind churning through everything she'd have to say on the witness stand. 23 years of buried memories dragged into fluorescent light for strangers to judge. Victor walked beside her, an umbrella held over both their heads. He'd offered to have his driver take her to a side entrance, away from the cameras and reporters already gathering like vultures. She'd refused. "I'm not hiding," she'd told him that morning over coffee. Neither of them could drink. He hid. "I'm done hiding." Now, facing the wall of flashing cameras and shouted questions, Elena wondered if pride was worth the nausea twisting her stomach. A reporter shoved a microphone toward her face. "Miss Cross, how does it feel knowing your father is a suspected crime lord?" Victor's hand landed on the reporter's wrist, not hard but firm enough to make the man step back. "No comment. Move." They pushed through the crowd into the relative quiet of the courthouse lobby. Agent Chen was waiting by the metal detectors, her badge clipped to her belt. "You ready?" she asked Elena. "Does it matter?" Chen's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, you being here matters. Half the victims from St. Catherine's are too scared to testify. Morrison's lawyers are banking on that fear. Well, they're going to be disappointed." Elena handed her bag to the security guard for inspection. The metal detector beeped when she walked through, the silver ring on her finger setting it off like it always did. The guard waved her through anyway. The courtroom was smaller than Elena had expected from watching legal dramas on television. Dark wood paneling, rows of benches that smelled like old paper and desperation. Morrison sat at the defense table in an orange jumpsuit, his hands folded calmly in front of him. His lawyers flanked him, expensive suits and practiced expressions of concerned innocence. When Morrison's eyes found Elena in the gallery, he smiled. That smile. The same one she remembered from when she was 6 years old and he'd walked past her bed in the dormitory. Like he knew something she didn't. Like he'd already won. Elena's fingernails bit into her palms. "Don't," Victor murmured beside her. "Don't give him anything." The judge entered, and everyone stood. The Honorable Margaret Reeves, no relation to Amy, Elena had checked, settled behind the bench with the air of someone who'd seen too much and believed too little. "Be seated. We're here for the matter of the United States versus James Arthur Morrison. Is the prosecution ready?" Assistant District Attorney Marcus Webb stood. He was younger than Elena had expected, maybe 35, with the kind of sharp-eyed intensity that suggested he didn't lose often. "Ready, Your Honor." "Defense?" Morrison's lead attorney, a silver-haired woman named Patricia Volkov, and yes, related to Dmitri, which should have been a conflict of interest but somehow wasn't, rose smoothly. "Ready, Your Honor." "Then let's begin." The prosecution's opening statement painted Morrison as a monster, which he was. Webb laid out the evidence methodically, Financial records showing hundreds of thousands of dollars moving through St. Catherine's accounts. Testimony from Gerald Hicks about the trafficking operation. Forensic evidence linking Morrison to Louise Martin's remains. The defense would have you believe, Webb said, pacing in front of the jury, that James Morrison was simply a dedicated director of a children's home, that he had no knowledge of any illegal activities, that he fled 8 years ago not because he was guilty, but because he was afraid of being falsely accused. Webb stopped, meeting each juror's eyes in turn. But the evidence will show you something different. It will show you a man who built an empire of suffering, who sold children, babies, some of them, to the highest bidder, who murdered anyone who threatened to expose him, and who would still be operating today if not for the courage of survivors like Elena Cross. Elena's throat tightened when Webb gestured toward her. All 12 jurors turned to look. She forced herself to sit still, to meet their gazes without flinching. Patricia Volkov's opening was different, quieter, more insidious. Ladies and gentlemen, we all want justice. We all want to believe that when terrible things happen, there's someone clear to blame. Someone we can point to and say, that's the monster. She paused, but wanting something to be true doesn't make it true. She walked to stand beside Morrison, one hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture that made Elena's skin crawl. James Morrison dedicated 30 years of his life to helping children nobody else wanted. He gave them food, shelter, education. Yes, the organization he ran was shut down. Yes, there were financial irregularities, but the prosecution wants you to believe that irregularities equal trafficking. That correlation equals causation. Volkov's voice dropped, became almost sympathetic. They're going to bring you witnesses who suffered real trauma. That trauma is real. Their pain is real. But pain doesn't equal evidence, and the prosecution's star witness, she looked directly at Elena, has every reason to believe what she's saying is true, but belief and truth aren't always the same thing. The implication was clear. Elena was either lying or delusional, possibly both. Victor's hand found Elena's under the wooden bench separating them from the rows behind. His grip was tight enough to hurt. Elena squeezed back, using the pain to anchor herself. The first witness was a financial analyst who walked the jury through years of suspicious transactions. Morrison's lawyer objected to nearly everything, slowing the testimony to a crawl. By lunch, they'd covered maybe a quarter of the financial evidence. Elena and Victor ate in a private room the prosecution had arranged. Chen joined them, picking at a sandwich she clearly didn't want. Volkov's good, she said finally. She's going to try to discredit every witness by questioning their motives or their memory. Will it work? Elena asked. Depends on the jury. Chen took a sip of water. That's why your testimony is crucial. You're not just another victim. You're proof that Morrison's crimes destroyed actual lives, that there's a direct line from his actions to real suffering. No pressure, Elena muttered. Victor hadn't touched his food. He sat with his arms crossed, staring at nothing. Elena recognized the expression. He was calculating something, running through scenarios in his head. What are you thinking? She asked. That Morrison's too calm. He should be worried, but he's sitting in there like he's watching a play that's only mildly interesting. Maybe he's just a psychopath, Chen offered. He is, but he's also smart. Smart enough to evade federal investigation for 8 years. Victor's eyes narrowed. He knows something we don't. The afternoon session brought Gerald Hicks to the stand. He looked smaller than he had in the warehouse, diminished somehow. The immunity deal had saved his life, but not his soul. That was evident in the way he couldn't meet anyone's eyes as he was sworn in. Webb took him through his testimony gently at first, how he'd been hired as St. Catherine's accountant in 1998, how he'd started noticing irregularities in the books, how Morrison had brought him into the office one day and explained very calmly that the irregularities were intentional and that Hicks could either be part of the solution or part of the problem. And you chose to be part of the solution? Webb asked. I chose to stay alive, Hicks said quietly. Morrison made it clear what happened to people who didn't cooperate. Can you describe what you mean by irregularities? Large cash deposits with no clear source, payments to shell companies that didn't seem to provide any services, wire transfers to overseas accounts. Hicks's voice was flat, rehearsed. I asked Morrison about it once. He showed me a file with photos of my daughter. She was 8. He didn't have to say anything else. The courtroom went silent. Even Volkov seemed momentarily at a loss. Webb pressed forward. Can you tell the jury about the day Louise Martin was brought to St. Catherine's? Hicks closed his eyes. April 7th, 2002. Morrison called me into his office around midnight. There was a woman in the basement. She was unconscious, bleeding. He said she'd seen something she shouldn't have, and that we needed to keep her quiet until he decided what to do with her. Did you see this woman? Briefly, long enough to know she needed a hospital. Did you suggest getting her medical help? I did. Morrison told me if I mentioned her to anyone, my daughter would disappear. Hicks's hands were shaking now, so I didn't say anything. I went home. And 3 days later, Morrison told me the problem had been handled. What did you understand that to mean? That he'd killed her. The jury shifted uncomfortably. One woman in the back row looked like she might be sick. Volkov stood for cross-examination, her expression sympathetic. Mr. Hicks, you've been granted full immunity in exchange for your testimony, correct? Yes. So no matter what you say here, you won't face any criminal charges? That's what immunity means. Yes. And you're aware that the more damaging your testimony is to my client, the more valuable you are to the prosecution? Hicks frowned. I'm telling the truth. Are you? Or are you telling the story that keeps you out of prison? Volkov paced in front of the witness stand. You claim Morrison threatened you. Do you have any proof of these threats? Any recordings, witnesses, documentation? It wasn't the kind of thing you record. How convenient. Volkov's voice hardened. You also claim you saw Louise Martin in the basement, but you didn't take any photos, didn't call the police, didn't try to help her in any way. In fact, according to your own testimony, you went home and did nothing. I was scared. You were complicit, Mr. Hicks. You witnessed what you claim was a kidnapping, and you did nothing because it was easier to look the other way. She paused, letting that sink in. And now, 23 years later, you expect this jury to believe you're suddenly conscience-stricken enough to tell the truth? I am telling the truth. Or you're telling whatever story keeps you from spending the rest of your life in prison. Webb objected. The judge sustained it, but the damage was done. Volkov had planted doubt, made Hicks look like a coward and a liar. Which he was, Elena thought bitterly. But that didn't make his testimony false. The trial recessed for the day at 5. Elena felt wrung out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Victor guided her out a back exit to avoid the press, but they were waiting anyway, shouting questions she didn't answer. In the car, Victor made a call in rapid French. Elena caught fragments, something about security and new information. When he hung up, his expression was grim. What is it? She asked. Dmitry Volkov posted bail this morning. Elena's stomach dropped. How? He was arrested for human trafficking. They don't grant bail for that. Technically, he was arrested for conspiracy to commit fraud. The trafficking charges are harder to prove without Morrison's direct testimony linking him to the operation. Victor's jaw clenched. His lawyers got the bail set at $5 million. He paid it in cash. You think he's going to run? I think he's going to do whatever it takes to make sure Morrison doesn't testify against him. Victor looked at her. Which means we need to be careful. If Volkov thinks you're a threat, I'm not running, not again. I'm not asking you to run, I'm asking you to let me keep you safe. They argued about it for the next hour at Victor's penthouse apartment, a space so different from Elena's old place that it still felt surreal to be there. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than most people's cars, art on the walls that Elena was pretty sure was real. Victor wanted her to have a security detail. Elena wanted to maintain some semblance of normal life. They compromised on a single bodyguard who would stay outside her hotel room at night and accompany her to court each day. His name is Marcus, Victor said, gesturing to a man who looked like he could bench press a small car. Former Special Forces. He's worked for me for 6 years. Marcus nodded at Elena. She nodded back, feeling ridiculous. 2 months ago, she'd been serving coffee at Murphy's diner. Now she had a bodyguard. This is insane, she muttered. This is necessary, Victor corrected. Morrison has already proven he'll kill to protect his secrets. Volkov is even more dangerous because he has the resources to make people disappear permanently. That night, Elena lay awake in her hotel room, listening to the city sounds filtering through the windows. Marcus was stationed outside her door, a silent presence she was hyper-aware of. The trial would resume tomorrow. She'd be called to testify within the next few days, and she had no idea if she was strong enough to face Morrison on the stand. Her phone buzzed. A text from Agent Chen. "You doing okay?" Elena typed back. "Define okay." "Fair point. For what it's worth, you're handling this better than most people would. I don't feel like I'm handling it. That's normal. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's another long day." Elena set the phone aside and stared at the ceiling. Sleep felt impossible, but eventually exhaustion won. She dreamed of cold floors and locked doors, and a little girl named Amy asking where they were taking her. The next 3 days of trial followed the same pattern. The prosecution brought witnesses. Volkov tore them apart on cross-examination. A social worker who'd investigated St. Catherine's in 2000 testified about suspicious injuries on several children. Volkov suggested she'd fabricated concerns to justify her job. A former staff member who'd quit after witnessing Morrison hit a child testified. Volkov produced evidence that the woman had been fired for theft. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Each witness damaged, each piece of evidence questioned. The jury looked increasingly uncertain. On the 4th day, Webb called Elena to the stand. The walk from the gallery to the witness box felt like miles. Every eye in the courtroom tracked her movement. Morrison watched her with that same calm smile, like this was all just entertainment. Elena placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Her voice didn't shake. Small victories. Webb started gently, asking about her childhood, her memories of St. Catherine's. Elena answered carefully, sticking to facts she could prove. Yes, she'd been brought to the orphanage at age 3. No, she didn't remember anything before that. Yes, she remembered children disappearing. "Can you describe the conditions at St. Catherine's?" Webb asked. "Cold. The building was always cold. We slept 4 to a room on cots with thin blankets. Breakfast was usually oatmeal or toast. Lunch was soup. Dinner was whatever they could make cheap." Elena's hands gripped the edge of the witness stand. But the worst part wasn't the food or the cold. It was knowing nobody wanted us, that we were just inventory waiting to be sold. "Objection," Volkov called. "Speculation." "Sustained. The witness will stick to what she personally observed." Elena nodded. "I observed that some kids would disappear in the middle of the night. I observed that when we asked where they'd gone, we were punished. I observed that Director Morrison would come into the dormitory sometimes and choose a child, and that child would be gone the next day. Did he ever choose you? No. Why do you think that was?" Elena met Morrison's eyes. "Because I fought back. The one time he tried to take me, I bit him hard enough to draw blood. After that, he left me alone." Morrison's smile slipped just for a second, just long enough for Elena to feel a flash of satisfaction. Webb walked her through the rest of her testimony. The years in foster care after St. Catherine's shut down. The struggle to survive. The night she met Victor and discovered the truth about her mother. When Webb finished, Volkov stood. She buttoned her suit jacket and approached the witness stand with the air of a shark circling prey. "Miss Cross, you've testified that you remember children disappearing from St. Catherine's, but you were at most 10 years old when the orphanage closed. Is that correct?" "Yes. And these memories you're describing, they're from when you were between the ages of 3 and 10. "Yes." "Are you aware that childhood memories, especially traumatic ones, are notoriously unreliable?" "I know what I saw." "Do you? Or do you know what you've convinced yourself you saw?" Volkov picked up a file from the defense table. "I have here a statement from Dr. Patricia Summers, a psychologist specializing in memory formation. She says, and I quote, 'Children who experience trauma often create false memories to explain their suffering. These false memories can feel completely real to the individual, even though they never actually occurred. Objection, Webb said. Dr. Summers isn't here to be cross-examined. I'm simply establishing that the witness's memories may not be reliable, Your Honor. The judge looked at Elena. I'll allow it. The jury will decide what weight to give the testimony. Volkov continued, her tone sympathetic in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. Miss Cross, isn't it true that you spent years angry at your mother for abandoning you? Yes. And when you discovered she hadn't abandoned you, that she'd actually died trying to protect you, that changed everything, didn't it? Elena saw the trap, but couldn't avoid it. Yes. So you went from believing your mother didn't want you to believing she was a hero who died fighting to save children. That's quite a shift in perspective. Because it's the truth. Or because it's the story you needed to believe to make sense of your pain. Volkov's voice was gentle, almost kind. No one is saying you're lying, Miss Cross, but isn't it possible that your memories of St. Catherine's have been colored by everything you learned later? That you've unconsciously rewritten your past to align with the narrative of your mother as a hero and Morrison as a villain? My memories are real. Are they? Can you prove with absolute certainty that the children you remember disappearing weren't simply adopted? That Morrison's visits to the dormitory weren't routine bed checks? That your interpretation of events isn't influenced by the fact that Victor Moreau, a man currently under federal investigation for racketeering, has convinced you Morrison killed your mother? Objection! Webb was on his feet. Counsel is testifying. Withdrawn. Volkov smiled. No further questions. Elena returned to her seat feeling like she'd been eviscerated. Victor's hand found hers again, solid and warm. You did well, he murmured. She made me sound crazy. She made you sound human. There's a difference. But Elena wasn't sure the jury saw it that way. When she glanced at them, several were watching her with expressions of pity mixed with doubt. The prosecution rested 2 days later. The defense called its own witnesses, character witnesses who swore Morrison was a dedicated public servant, financial experts who claimed the accounting irregularities could be explained by clerical errors, a psychologist who testified about the unreliability of recovered memories. It was a masterclass in creating reasonable doubt. On the 8th day of trial, Morrison took the stand. He wore a suit instead of the orange jumpsuit, a calculated choice to make him look less like a criminal. His demeanor was calm, almost grandfatherly. When his lawyer asked him to tell the jury about his work at St. Catherine's, his voice was thick with emotion. I dedicated my life to helping children nobody else wanted, he said. Was it perfect? No. We were always underfunded, always struggling, but every child who came through our doors got food, shelter, education, and love. Elena's fingernails dug crescents into her palms. Morrison's lawyer walked him through his version of events. The financial irregularities were explained as attempts to stretch limited funding. The children who'd disappeared had all been legally adopted. He had paperwork to prove it, though several of the adoption agencies had since closed. Louise Martin's death was tragic, but unconnected to him. He'd never met the woman. But the witness testimony, his lawyer prompted. Gerald Hicks is a desperate man trying to avoid prison. Elena Cross is a traumatized woman who's been manipulated by Victor Moreau into believing a false narrative. Morrison looked directly at the jury. I understand why they're saying what they're saying, but that doesn't make it true. When Webb stood for cross-examination, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Morrison, you testified that you never met Louise Martin. Is that correct? That's correct. Then can you explain why your fingerprints were found on her remains? The courtroom erupted. Morrison's face went white. His lawyer was on her feet, objecting, demanding to know when this evidence had been disclosed. Webb remained calm. The forensic analysis was only completed yesterday, Your Honor. The defense was notified this morning per discovery rules. The judge looked at Morrison. Answer the question, Mr. Morrison. Morrison's mouth opened and closed. For the first time since the trial started, he looked rattled. That's impossible. There must be some mistake. The forensic report says otherwise. Your fingerprints, clear as day, on the victim's collarbone. Webb approached the stand. So either you're lying about never meeting her, or you'd like to explain how your fingerprints ended up on a murdered woman's skeleton. I want to consult with my lawyer. You can consult all you want, but the evidence doesn't lie, does it, Mr. Morrison? Volkov called for a recess. The judge granted it. As the courtroom cleared, Elena turned to Victor. Did you know about the fingerprints? I suspected. The forensics team was still processing when the trial started. His expression was grim satisfaction. Morrison got sloppy. He thought 23 years was long enough that there wouldn't be any physical evidence left. What happens now? Now the defense has to decide if Morrison keeps testifying or if they cut their losses and rest their case. They cut their losses. When court resumed after lunch, Volkov announced that the defense rested without calling Morrison back to the stand. It was an admission of defeat, and everyone knew it. Closing arguments happened the next day. Webb was surgical in his approach, walking the jury through every piece of evidence, every witness, every contradiction in Morrison's testimony. He ended by holding up a photo of Louise Martin, alive and smiling. This woman died trying to save a child she didn't know. She died because she believed children deserve protection, and the man who killed her has spent 23 years walking free, destroying more lives, creating more victims. Webb set the photo down. It's time for that to end. Volkov's closing argument focused on reasonable doubt, on the unreliability of witnesses with grudges and unclear memories, on the fact that circumstantial evidence, no matter how compelling, wasn't proof beyond reasonable doubt. You have a responsibility, she told the jury, not just to the victims, real or imagined, but to justice itself. And justice requires certainty. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Elena spent those hours in a private room with Victor, unable to sit still, unable to think about anything except the 12 strangers deciding Morrison's fate. Agent Chen came and went, bringing updates that weren't really updates. The jury had asked for transcripts of certain testimony. They'd asked to see the forensic evidence again. At 7 p.m., word came. The jury had reached a verdict. The courtroom filled quickly. Elena took her seat in the gallery, Victor beside her, Marcus standing behind them like a wall. Morrison was brought in, his expression carefully neutral, but Elena could see tension in the set of his shoulders. The jury filed in. None of them looked at Morrison. Elena had read somewhere that was a bad sign for the defense. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. The foreman stood. We have, Your Honor. On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of Louise Martin, how do you find? We find the defendant guilty. The courtroom exploded. Morrison's face crumpled. His lawyer was objecting to something, demanding a mistrial, but her voice was drowned out by the noise. Elena couldn't hear anything over the roaring in her ears. Guilty. After 23 years, someone had finally said it out loud. Morrison was guilty. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. On the charges of conspiracy to commit human trafficking, how do you find? Guilty. On the charges of kidnapping? Guilty. 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 14 charges, 14 guilty verdicts. When the judge finished polling the jury, Morrison was facing 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He'd die in prison. He'd die alone. And he'd never hurt another child. Elena's legs gave out. Victor caught her, his arm around her waist, the only thing keeping her upright. It's over, he said quietly. It's over. But it wasn't. Not yet. Because when Elena looked up, she saw Dmitry Volkov in the back of the courtroom, his face a mask of cold fury, and when his eyes met hers, she knew with absolute certainty that he wasn't going to let this verdict stand without consequences. Volkov was gone before Elena could blink, disappearing into the crowd of reporters and spectators flooding the courtroom hallway. Victor's hand tightened on her arm, his body shifting to shield her from the press of bodies. Marcus, he said sharply. The bodyguard was already moving, clearing a path toward the side exit. Victor guided Elena through the chaos, ignoring the reporters shouting questions, the flash of cameras, the crush of people trying to get close. Agent Chen appeared beside them, her badge out, creating a buffer between Elena and the worst of it. They made it to the parking garage, where Victor's Mercedes waited with the engine already running. One of his men was behind the wheel. Marcus got in front, Victor and Elena in back. The car pulled out before the doors were fully closed. Where are we going? Elena asked. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Somewhere safe. Victor pulled out his phone and made a call. It's done. Morrison got life, but Volkov was in the courtroom. I need to know where he is now and where he's going. A pause. No, don't lose him. Just track him. I want to know if he so much as breathes wrong. He hung up and looked at Elena. She was shaking, she realized. Not from fear exactly, but from the sudden absence of the tension she'd been carrying for months. Morrison was guilty. He'd spend the rest of his life in a cage. The girl who'd been stolen at 3 years old had finally gotten something that looked like justice. But Volkov's expression kept replaying in her mind, that cold fury, that promise of retribution. He's going to come after me, she said. He's going to try. Victor's voice was flat, certain. Which is why you're not going back to the hotel. I have a safe house outside the city. You'll stay there until we deal with Volkov. Deal with him how? Victor didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was careful. The same way we dealt with Morrison. Evidence, testimony, federal prosecution. Elena looked at him, really looked at him. You're lying. Excuse me? You're planning something else, something the FBI wouldn't approve of. She leaned back against the leather seat. I'm not stupid, Victor. I know what you do. I know what you are. What I am, Victor said slowly, is your father, and my priority is keeping you alive, not maintaining the moral high ground. Morrison got arrested. He got convicted. The system worked. Morrison was small-time compared to Volkov. The trafficking network we dismantled was one branch of a much larger operation. Volkov has connections in 3 countries, judges on his payroll, and enough money to disappear anyone he wants disappeared. Victor's jaw clenched. The system will try to prosecute him. It might even succeed. But in the meantime, he's free on bail with every resource at his disposal, and a very good reason to want you dead. The car merged onto the highway, heading north. Elena watched the city lights blur past the window. Everything felt surreal, like she was watching her life happen to someone else. How long do I have to hide? She asked. As long as it takes. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have right now. Elena's phone buzzed. A text from Agent Chen. Are you okay? Call me when you can. She typed back, I'm fine. With Victor. We'll call tomorrow. The drive took 90 minutes, ending at a property that looked more like a small compound than a house. High walls, security cameras visible even in the dark, guards at a gatehouse who checked the car before waving them through. The main building was modern, all glass and steel, lit from within like a lantern. You own this? Elena asked as they pulled into a garage that held 4 other vehicles, each more expensive than the last. I own several properties like this, places where people I care about can stay when things get complicated. How often do things get complicated? Often enough. Inside, the house was beautiful in an impersonal way. Expensive furniture, tasteful art, nothing that suggested anyone actually lived there. A woman in her 50s was waiting in the foyer, her gray hair pulled back in a bun. Elena, this is Margaret. She manages the property and will make sure you have everything you need. Margaret smiled warmly. Your room is ready upstairs, second door on the left. I've put together some clothes in your size, but if you need anything else, just let me know. Thank you, Elena managed. She followed Margaret upstairs while Victor disappeared into what looked like an office, already on his phone. The bedroom was larger than Elena's entire apartment had been, with a king bed, sitting area, and windows overlooking dark woods. The clothes in the closet ranged from casual to formal, all in her size, all with the tags still on. How did you know what size I'd need? Elena asked. Margaret's expression was kind. Mr. Moreau is very thorough. Now, are you hungry? I can bring up some food. Elena realized she hadn't eaten since breakfast. That would be great. Alone, she sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process the last 12 hours. Morrison convicted. Volkov threatening. Her entire life upended again. Except this time she had a father who owned safe houses and employed people to manage them. This time she wasn't running alone. Her phone rang. Agent Chen. Are you really okay? Chen asked without preamble. I don't know. Morrison's going to prison. That should feel like winning, right? It is winning, but I understand if it doesn't feel that way yet. Elena heard voices in the background, the bustle of the FBI office. What happens with Volkov now? We're building a case. His bail is being revoked. The judge agreed he's a flight risk. We should have him back in custody within 48 hours. Should have? Chen hesitated. He's got resources. If he wants to run, he might manage it. But we're watching him. Every asset, every known associate. He won't get far. After they hung up, Elena changed into borrowed pajamas and ate the food Margaret brought. Chicken, vegetables, bread that was still warm. Normal things. Comforting things. But she couldn't taste any of it. Victor knocked on her door around midnight. He looked exhausted, his tie loosened, jacket discarded somewhere. Can I come in? Elena nodded. He sat in the chair by the window while she stayed on the bed, both of them maintaining careful distance. My people tracked Volkov to his estate in Connecticut, Victor said. He's moving money, liquidating assets. Chen's right that he's planning to run. Can they stop him? The FBI will try, but Volkov has private planes, offshore accounts, and dual citizenship in Russia. If he decides to disappear, he probably can. So we just wait and hope the FBI gets to him first? Victor was quiet for a long moment. There's another option. Elena's stomach tightened. What kind of option? The kind where Volkov doesn't get the chance to run, where he's dealt with permanently before he can threaten you or anyone else. You mean kill him? I mean, make sure he can't hurt anyone ever again, by whatever means necessary. Elena stood up, crossed to the window. The woods outside were pitch black, impenetrable. If you kill him, you're no better than he is. I'm already no better than he is. Victor's voice was matter of fact. I've done things that would put me in prison for life if they could be proven. The difference is my line in the sand. Children. I don't hurt them, don't traffic them. Don't look the other way when others do. Volkov crossed that line. He doesn't get to come back from it. And you get to be judge and executioner? Someone has to be. The legal system is too slow, too easily corrupted. Volkov has already proven that. Elena turned to face him. My mother believed in the law. She tried to save Amy through the proper channels, reporting to child services, documenting everything. And they killed her for it. But that doesn't mean she was wrong to try. No, Victor agreed. It means she was brave, and I loved her for that bravery. But Elena, I can't lose you too. If there's even a chance that Volkov will come after you, I have to eliminate that chance. By becoming the thing you hate. I've always been the thing I hate. I just try to point it in the right direction. They stared at each other across the expensive room. Father and daughter, strangers bound by blood and trauma and choices neither of them had asked to make. Don't kill him, Elena said finally. Not unless there's no other option. Give Chen and her team a chance to do this the right way. Victor nodded slowly. 48 hours. If the FBI hasn't arrested him by then, I do this my way. It was the best compromise Elena was going to get. She barely slept that night, her mind churning through everything. The next morning, she woke to sun streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee drifting upstairs. Margaret had breakfast waiting in the kitchen, pancakes, bacon, fresh fruit. Victor was already up, dressed in a suit, looking like he'd had 8 hours of solid sleep instead of whatever he'd actually gotten. Any news? Elena asked, pouring coffee. Volkov's still at his estate. FBI has surveillance set up on all exits. Chen thinks they'll move to arrest him this afternoon. You don't sound convinced. Because I know men like Volkov. They always have an escape plan. He set down his phone. How are you holding up? Elena shrugged. I testified. Morrison got convicted, and now I'm in witness protection from a Russian crime lord. It's been a weird couple of months. Victor's mouth twitched in what might have been a smile. That's one way to put it. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you regret it? The life you chose? The things you've done? Victor considered this, his expression thoughtful. I regret not finding your mother in time. I regret every day you spent alone, scared, without anyone to protect you. But the life I chose? It gave me the resources to find you, to get justice for Louise, so no, I don't regret it. even if I probably should. Before Elena could respond, Victor's phone rang. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, then stood abruptly. When? A pause. How many? Another pause. I'm on my way. He hung up and looked at Elena, his expression grim. Volkov's estate is on fire. FBI is reporting multiple casualties. What? How? I don't know yet, but I need to go there. Marcus will stay with you. Don't leave the house. Don't answer the door for anyone except Margaret or me. Victor, but he was already moving, grabbing his jacket, shouting orders to someone on his phone. Within 2 minutes, he was gone, the sound of the garage door closing echoing through the too quiet house. Elena stood in the kitchen, her coffee growing cold in her hands. Fire. Casualties. What had happened? She turned on the television, flipping through news channels until she found one covering the story. Aerial footage showed Volkov's estate engulfed in flames, fire trucks, and emergency vehicles swarming the property. The reporter's voice was tense with the kind of excitement that came from covering tragedy. Authorities are reporting at least 6 confirmed casualties, though that number is expected to rise. The cause of the fire is still unknown, but sources close to the investigation suggest it may not have been accidental. Dmitry Volkov, who is out on bail pending trial on fraud charges, is among those unaccounted for. Elena's phone rang. Agent Chen. Are you watching this? Chen asked, her voice tight. Yeah, what happened? We don't know yet. The FBI team was preparing to execute the arrest warrant when the explosion happened. Best guess right now is that Volkov had the place rigged, dead man's switch maybe, or he was destroying evidence and it got out of hand. Is he dead? We haven't found a body yet, but if he was in there when it went up, he didn't survive. Chen paused. Elena, until we confirm Volkov's dead, you need to stay wherever Victor has you. If he did survive, if this was some kind of escape plan, I'm not going anywhere. The day crawled past. Elena tried to distract herself with television, with books from the well-stocked shelves, with anything that would keep her mind from spiraling. Margaret brought lunch, then dinner, both of which Elena picked at without appetite. Marcus stood guard outside, a silent presence that should have been reassuring but just felt ominous. Victor called at 8 p.m. They found Volkov, he said without preamble. Elena's heart stopped. Alive? No. He was in his office when the fire started. According to the forensics team, he'd been dead before the flames reached him. Bullet wound to the head, close range. Someone killed him? Who? The working theory is suicide. He knew the FBI was coming, knew he was looking at life in prison. Rather than face that, he destroyed the evidence and himself with it. Elena sat down hard on the couch. Do you believe that? Victor was quiet for a moment. I believe he's dead. The why matters less than the result. Which is you're safe. The trafficking network is dismantled. Morrison's in prison. Volkov's dead and everyone else involved is either arrested or running scared. His voice softened slightly. It's over, Elena. You can go home. Home. The word felt strange. Elena didn't have a home anymore. Her apartment had been given up when she'd moved to the hotel. Her job at Murphy's Diner long abandoned. She had nothing except the clothes on her back and a father she barely knew. Where is home exactly? She asked. Wherever you want it to be. The hotel, if you want space. My place if you want family. Or I can set you up in your own apartment, help you figure out what comes next. What comes next? Elena had spent so long focused on survival, on justice for her mother, on stopping Morrison that she'd never thought about after. What did after look like? I don't know, she admitted. I don't know what I want. Then take your time figuring it out. You've earned that. They hung up, and Elena sat in the silent house watching the news coverage of Volkov's death. Suicide, the reporters were saying now, coward's way out. Justice denied. She wondered if they were right, or if Victor's careful non-answer meant something else entirely. She wondered if she wanted to know. Marcus drove her back to the city the next morning. The hotel suite felt smaller than she remembered. The luxury that had seemed overwhelming now, just empty space with nice furniture. Elena stood by the window looking out at the skyline and felt completely untethered. Her phone buzzed with messages she'd been ignoring. Friends from college asking if she was okay, if the Elena Cross on the news was really her. Former coworkers from the diner expressing support. A few reporters trying to get interviews. And one from a number she didn't recognize. This is Amy Reeves's mother. Thank you for helping get justice for my daughter. Elena stared at that message for a long time. Amy's mother. She hadn't even known Amy had a mother out there. Someone who'd been looking for her, grieving her. She typed back, "I'm so sorry I couldn't save her. I was too young to understand what was happening." The response came quickly. "You were a child. It wasn't your responsibility. But you gave me answers I've needed for 23 years. That's everything." Elena's eyes burned. She set the phone down and let herself cry. Really cry. For the first time since Morrison's conviction. For Amy. For all the other children who hadn't survived. For her mother, who had died trying to help. For herself. For the childhood that had been stolen and could never be returned. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollow, but clean, like something poisonous had been purged. There was a knock at the door. Elena checked the peephole, Victor, holding a bag from what looked like a bakery. She let him in. He set the bag on the counter. "Croissants. Margaret said you haven't been eating properly." "Margaret's a snitch. Margaret cares about you." Victor pulled out plates, divided the pastries between them. "I wanted to talk to you about something." Elena's stomach tightened. "Okay." The FBI recovered significant assets from Volkov's estate before the fire. Money, property, holdings in various companies. As part of the settlement, they're liquidating everything and distributing it to victims of the trafficking network. He paused. "You're entitled to compensation. Quite a lot of it, actually." "I don't want his money." "I understand, but there are 67 confirmed victims, most of them still alive, and they'll need support. Medical care, therapy, education. The compensation fund could change their lives." Elena looked at him. "You're saying I should take the money and use it to help the others." "I'm saying you have options. You could take it for yourself. You've earned it. You could donate it. Or you could use it to start something. A foundation, maybe. A place where trafficking survivors can get the help they need." The idea settled over Elena like a coat that fit perfectly. A place for survivors. A place that could be what St. Catherine's should have been. Safe, warm, focused on healing instead of punishment. "I'd need help," she said slowly. "I don't know anything about running a foundation. I know people, good people who do this kind of work. They could help you set it up." Victor met her eyes. "This isn't something you have to decide today, but I wanted you to know the possibility exists." They ate croissants in companionable silence. Elena's mind was already spinning with ideas. What such a place would look like, what it would offer, how it could be different from every other institution that had failed children like her. "I'd want it to be called Louise's place," she said. "After my mother." Victor's expression softened. She would have loved that. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings. Elena met with lawyers who explained the compensation fund, with social workers who outlined what trafficking survivors needed most, with architects who showed her designs for facilities that could serve as both crisis centers and long-term support. Victor was present for most of it, offering advice when asked, but letting Elena make the decisions. Slowly, a plan took shape. Louise's Place would be a multi-facility organization offering emergency housing, therapy, job training, and legal support for trafficking survivors and at-risk children. The main building would be in the city, with satellite locations planned for 3 other states. Elena would run it with a board of directors made up of former prosecutors, child welfare experts, and survivors themselves. It was ambitious. It was probably impossible. But every time Elena thought about giving up, she remembered Amy's small hand in hers, the way the little girl had trusted her to keep her safe. She hadn't been able to save Amy, but maybe she could save others like her. The paperwork to establish the foundation took 6 months. During that time, Elena enrolled in online classes to finish her psychology degree. She met with survivors who'd aged out of the system, hearing their stories, and learning what had helped them and what had failed. She worked with Victor's contacts to identify properties that could be converted into safe houses. And she learned to live with her father. It wasn't smooth, They argued about his continued illegal activities. Elena knew he was still involved in things that would put him in prison, and she hated it even as she understood it. They argued about how much security Louise's place needed, with Victor insisting on armed guards and Elena pushing back on creating a fortress that would terrify the kids they were trying to help. They argued about her dating when she started seeing someone, a lawyer she'd met through the foundation work. But they also learned each other's rhythms. Victor's dry humor that appeared in unexpected moments. Elena's stubborn refusal to back down from anything she believed in. They had dinner together twice a week, usually at Victor's place, where he'd learned to cook 3 dishes competently, and Elena pretended not to notice when he ordered takeout and transferred it to his own plates. They were figuring it out. Family, whatever that meant. Morrison's formal sentencing happened 8 months after the verdict. Elena attended, sitting in the same gallery where she'd watched the trial. Morrison was brought in looking smaller somehow, diminished by months in county jail awaiting transfer to federal prison. The judge read the sentence. 3 consecutive life terms without possibility of parole. Morrison would die behind bars. There would be no appeals, no second chances, no redemption arc. When the bailiff led him away, Morrison looked at Elena one last time. She met his gaze steadily, no longer the frightened child he'd terrorized. She was Elena Cross, survivor and advocate. She was Louise Martin's daughter. She was Victor Moreau's daughter. And she was done being afraid. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed her. Elena had gotten better at handling them, at controlling the narrative. "How do you feel about the sentence, Joanne?" someone shouted. "I feel like justice was served, not just for my mother, but for every child Morrison hurt." Elena paused, looked directly at the cameras. "But justice isn't enough. We need to make sure this can never happen again. That's why I'm opening Louise's place, a comprehensive support center for trafficking survivors. We're hiring counselors, caseworkers, and legal advocates. And we're looking for volunteers. If you want to be part of making sure no child falls through the cracks again, visit our website, She rattled off the URL, then turned and walked away before they could ask more questions. Victor was waiting by the car, Marcus beside him. "That was a good speech," Victor said as they drove away. "I've been practicing." It showed, in a good way. Elena looked out the window at the city passing by. Somewhere in one of these buildings, there was probably a child who needed help right now. A child scared and alone and convinced nobody cared. Louise's place would open in 3 months. It wouldn't save everyone. It wouldn't undo the damage that had already been done. But it would be there. A light in the darkness. A place that proved somebody did care. That night, Elena sat in her apartment, her own place now, not borrowed or temporary, and wrote in the journal her therapist had suggested she keep. She wrote about Amy, about the other children from St. Catherine's whose names she'd never learned. She wrote about her mother's courage and her father's complicated morality. She wrote about Morrison rotting in prison and Volkov dead in his burning estate. And she wrote about hope. The fragile, stubborn kind that refused to die even when everything else did. The last entry on the page was simple. "Tomorrow, I start building something good out of all this broken. That has to mean something. It has to be enough." She closed the journal and looked at the ring on her finger. The inscription was still too worn to read completely, but she knew what it said now. Eternal Love, V&L. 2002. Her parents had loved each other. They'd created her out of that love. And even though everything that followed was violence and loss and pain, that original truth remained. She was wanted, she was loved, and she was finally, after 23 years, home. The morning Louise's place officially opened, Elena stood in the lobby and watched families arrive. Former traffickers, survivors bringing their children to the after-school program. A teenage girl fleeing an abusive situation getting checked into emergency housing. A young boy clutching a social worker's hand, his eyes wide with the kind of fear Elena recognized in her bones. She walked over to him, crouched down to his eye level. "Hi, I'm Elena. What's your name?" The boy looked at the social worker, who nodded encouragement. "Marcus," he whispered. Elena smiled. "That's a strong name. Marcus, you know what this place is?" He shook his head. "It's somewhere safe. Somewhere nobody's going to hurt you, and there are people here whose whole job is to make sure you're okay." She touched the ring on her finger, the one that had started everything. I know you're scared, but you're not alone anymore. I promise. Marcus's grip on the social worker's hand loosened slightly. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Victor appeared beside Elena as the social worker led Marcus deeper into the building. He didn't say anything, just stood with her and watched the activity swirling through the space they'd built together. Your mother would be proud, he said finally. Yeah, Elena agreed, her throat tight. I think she would be. They stood together in the lobby of Louise's place, surrounded by the kind of hope that only existed because someone had refused to give up. The kind that survived trauma and fought back against darkness. The kind that said even when everything was broken, something good could still be built from the pieces. Elena had spent 23 years searching for where she belonged. She'd finally found it. 3 weeks after Louise's place opened, Elena got a call that changed everything again. She was in her office reviewing intake forms when her assistant knocked on the door. Sarah was 24, a former foster kid who'd aged out of the system and fought her way through community college. She had purple hair and a nose ring and didn't trust easily, which made her perfect for vetting the endless stream of people who wanted access to the kids. There's a woman here, Sarah said. Says her name is Catherine Morrison. She's asking to speak with you. Elena's pen stopped moving. Morrison? As in Director Morrison's wife. I checked her ID. It's legit. Every instinct told Elena to refuse, to have security escort the woman out and make it clear she wasn't welcome. But curiosity won out over anger. Put her in conference room B. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Elena used those 5 minutes to call Victor. He answered on the second ring. Morrison's wife is here, Elena said without preamble. At Louise's place. Asking to talk to me. Don't. Victor's voice was sharp. Don't meet with her alone. Don't trust anything she says. I'm sending Marcus over right now. She's one woman. I can handle... Elena, please, just wait until Marcus gets there. The fear in his voice stopped her argument. Okay, I'll wait. Marcus arrived 7 minutes later, his expression professionally neutral, but his body language screaming alert. He took up position by the door of conference room B while Elena entered. Catherine Morrison sat at the table looking nothing like Elena had expected. She was maybe 60, with gray hair cut short and practical clothing that belonged in a church basement, not a crime lord's family. Her hands were folded on the table, no jewelry except a simple gold band on her ring finger. When she looked up, her eyes were red-rimmed. Miss Cross, thank you for seeing me. Elena sat across from her, keeping the table between them. You have 5 minutes. I know what my husband did. Catherine's voice was steady despite the tears tracking down her face. I know he hurt children, sold them, killed your mother. I know he's a monster, and I know saying I'm sorry doesn't mean anything, but I had to come here anyway. Why? Because I need you to know I didn't know. Not at first. Not until it was too late. Catherine's hands twisted together. We were married 32 years. I thought he was a good man doing good work. And by the time I realized what he really was, I was too scared to leave. Elena's jaw clenched. You knew about the trafficking. I found out 12 years ago. I saw documents he'd left out, files with children's photos and prices written on them like they were livestock. Catherine's voice cracked. I confronted him. He said if I told anyone, he'd make sure I disappeared just like Louise Martin did. He described what he'd done to her, every detail, so I could know exactly what would happen to me if I spoke up. So you stayed quiet while more children were hurt? Yes. Catherine met Elena's eyes. I stayed quiet because I was a coward. I told myself there was nothing I could do, that he'd kill me if I tried, that someone else would stop him eventually. But the truth is, I was just scared. And children suffered because of my fear. Elena wanted to rage at this woman, to scream that fear wasn't an excuse, that she could have saved lives if she'd just been brave enough. But she'd spent enough time with trauma survivors to know it wasn't that simple. Abuse broke people in complicated ways, made them complicit in their own cages. Why are you telling me this now? Elena asked. Because he's in prison and can't hurt me anymore. And because I have information the FBI needs. Catherine pulled a USB drive from her purse and set it on the table. This has files James kept at home. Names, locations, buyers. Evidence of trafficking operations in 4 other states that haven't been shut down yet. Elena stared at the drive. You had this the whole time? I copied it 6 years ago and hid it. I thought maybe one day I'd be brave enough to use it. Catherine pushed the drive across the table. I wasn't, but you were. You testified against him, faced him in court, helped put him away. So I'm giving this to you. Do what I couldn't. Elena took the drive, her hand shaking slightly. The FBI should have this directly. I tried. I went to Agent Chen's office before I came here. She said any evidence from a spouse might be challenged in court, that I'd have to testify, that James's lawyers would tear me apart. Catherine's voice dropped. I can't do that. I know that makes me weak, but I can't sit in a courtroom and have him stare at me. I'll break. Then what do you expect me to do with this? Give it to the FBI. Let them use it however they can. If they need testimony, maybe some of the victims on those files will be brave enough. Catherine stood. I know this doesn't make up for anything. I know I'm responsible for every child I could have saved and didn't. But maybe this can stop it from happening to more kids. She walked to the door, then paused. Your mother tried to save a little girl she didn't even know. She died for it. You're carrying on her work. That means something. Catherine left. Elena sat alone with the USB drive, her mind racing. Marcus appeared in the doorway. You okay? I don't know. Elena held up the drive. Call Victor. Tell him we need to meet with Agent Chen today. Chen met them at FBI headquarters 3 hours later. She looked exhausted, her desk covered in case files and cold coffee. When Elena handed over the USB drive and explained where it came from, Chen's expression went from skeptical to interested to grim. If this is what Catherine Morrison says it is, it could break open cases we've been working for years. She plugged the drive into her computer, pulled up files. Her eyes widened. These are detailed records. Names, dates, financial transactions. There's even correspondence between Morrison and buyers in Eastern Europe. Can you use it? Elena asked. That's complicated. Spousal privilege means Catherine can't be forced to testify against her husband, and any evidence she provides might be considered fruit of the poisonous tree if Morrison's lawyers argue she obtained it illegally. Victor leaned forward. But Morrison's already convicted. This isn't about him anymore. It's about the other operations still running. Exactly. Chen pulled up a file showing photos of children, their faces blurred but their fear visible. There are at least 40 kids in these files whose locations we didn't know. If we move fast, we can recover them. The evidentiary issues can be sorted out later. Then move fast, Elena said. Chen did. Within 6 hours, she'd assembled a task force. By midnight, raids were happening simultaneously in 4 states. Elena watched the news coverage from Victor's apartment, unable to look away from the footage of children being carried out of buildings by agents, wrapped in blankets, scared but safe. 43 children recovered in total, 18 adults arrested, 3 trafficking rings dismantled. And it was only possible because Catherine Morrison had finally found enough courage to do the right thing, even if it came 2 decades too late. Elena called Catherine the next morning. The woman answered on the first ring, her voice cautious. The FBI recovered 43 kids last night, Elena said. Because of what you gave us. Catherine was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, she was crying. 43? 43. They're safe now. Getting medical care, being reunited with families or placed in protective custody. Thank you for telling me. Elena wanted to hate this woman. Wanted to blame her for every child who'd suffered while she stayed silent. But she'd learned something in the past year about the difference between justice and cruelty. Morrison deserved prison. Catherine deserved to live with her guilt. But she also deserved to know that her final act of courage had mattered. What you did was important, Elena said. It doesn't erase the past, but it saved lives. That counts for something. After they hung up, Victor handed Elena coffee. They stood by the window watching the city wake up. You were generous with her, he said. She was a victim too. Just a different kind. Elena sipped the coffee, bitter and strong the way she'd learned to like it. And she did more to help those kids than a lot of people who weren't scared would have done. You're starting to sound like your mother. Is that a bad thing? No. Victor's expression softened. It's the best thing. The fallout from the raids dominated news cycles for weeks. Elena did interview after interview using the platform to talk about Louise's place, about the need for better child welfare systems, about the warning signs of trafficking. She hated being in the spotlight, but she was good at it, at taking her pain and turning it into something that might prevent someone else's pain. It was exhausting, but it worked. Donations poured into Louise's place. Volunteers signed up faster than they could be processed. 3 other cities reached out asking how to replicate the model in their communities. 2 months after the raids, Elena was in her office when Sarah knocked again. "There's a girl here asking for you specifically. Says her name is Rachel Morrison." Elena's stomach dropped. "Morrison has a daughter?" "Apparently. She's 17, been in foster care since he was arrested." Sarah hesitated. "She seems really scared. Keeps saying she needs to talk to you, that nobody else will understand." Elena found Rachel in the same conference room where she'd met Catherine. The girl was thin, with dark hair and her father's eyes. She sat hunched in on herself like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. "Rachel, I'm Elena." The girl looked up, and Elena saw tears streaming down her face. "He's my father, but I hate him. I've hated him since I was 12 and figured out what he really did. But everyone keeps treating me like I'm guilty too. Like I'm going to turn into him." Elena's heart cracked. She'd been so focused on the children Morrison had hurt directly that she'd never thought about the collateral damage, the daughter who had to live with his name. "You're not your father," Elena said, sitting down across from her. "You're not responsible for his choices." "But I knew." Rachel's voice broke. "Not everything, but I knew something was wrong. The way he talked about the kids at St. Catherine's, like they were things instead of people. The way my mom would flinch when he came home. And I never said anything because I was scared." "How old were you when you started noticing? 10? Maybe 11? "Rachel, you were a child. Children aren't responsible for stopping adult criminals, especially when those criminals are their parents." "But you did. You testified against him." "I was 23 when I testified, and I only found out what he'd done a few months before that. You can't compare our situations." Rachel wiped her eyes. "My foster family is nice, but they don't know what to say to me. Nobody does. The kids at school found out who my dad is, and now they either avoid me or ask horrible questions. My therapist keeps talking about forgiveness and healing, but I don't want to forgive him. I want to make sure nobody ever thinks I'm like him." Elena understood that need in her bones. The need to prove you weren't defined by the worst thing someone else had done. "What do you want to do after you graduate?" she asked. "I want to be a social worker. I want to help kids who are stuck in bad situations." Rachel met her eyes. "Like the ones my father hurt. I know that probably sounds stupid." "It doesn't sound stupid. It sounds like you're trying to take something terrible and turn it into something good." Elena paused. "We have a summer internship program here at Louise's place. It's competitive, but if you're interested, I can make sure your application gets serious consideration." Rachel's expression transformed. "Really? You'd let me work here?" "If you're qualified and committed, yes. We need people who understand what these kids have been through, who can meet them where they are instead of where we wish they were." "I'm committed. I promise. I'll work harder than anyone. I believe you." Elena stood. "Give your application to Sarah at the front desk. We'll review it with the rest." Rachel practically ran out of the office, more animated than she'd been since arriving. Victor, who'd been waiting in the hallway, stepped inside. "Morrison's daughter?" "Yeah, she wants to intern here. Are you sure that's a good idea? The optics alone?" "The optics can go to hell," Elena said firmly. "That girl has spent 7 years carrying guilt that isn't hers. If she wants to help, if she's genuinely committed to this work, I'm not going to punish her for her father's crimes." Victor studied her for a moment. "You're thinking about yourself at her age?" "Maybe. But I'm also thinking about all the kids who need help and don't care whose child is providing it as long as someone does." Rachel started her internship in June. She was quiet at first, nervous around the other staff, terrified of making mistakes. But she was good with the kids, patient, understanding, willing to sit with them through panic attacks and nightmares. She never mentioned her father, but sometimes Elena would catch her staring at photos of the children Morrison had hurt. her expression haunted. 3 weeks into the internship, Rachel came to Elena's office in tears. "I can't do this," she said. "I thought I could, but every time I look at these kids, I think about how my father did this to people just like them, how I'm trying to clean up his mess, and it's never going to be enough." Elena closed her laptop and gave Rachel her full attention. "You're right. It's not enough. Nothing you do will ever undo what he did. But that's not the question you should be asking yourself." What should I be asking? Ask yourself if what you're doing matters to the kids you're helping right now. Ask yourself if Marcus, the little boy you've been working with on his reading, cares that you're Morrison's daughter, or if he just cares that you show up for him every day. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "He doesn't care. He just likes that I'm patient when he gets frustrated." Exactly. You're not trying to erase your father's crimes. You're trying to be something different, someone different, and you're succeeding. It doesn't feel like success. Success rarely does when you're in the middle of it. But I've watched you work. You're making a difference. Don't let guilt stop you from doing that. Rachel returned to work the next day. She finished the internship at the end of summer with glowing reviews from the staff. When she left for college in the fall, she told Elena she was majoring in social work with a focus on trauma-informed care. "I'm going to come back when I graduate," Rachel said on her last day. "If you'll have me." "We'll have you," Elena promised. The year anniversary of Louise's Place opening came faster than Elena expected. They marked it with a quiet celebration, cake in the break room, thank you speeches from the staff. Elena stood in front of 40 people who'd dedicated themselves to this work and felt overwhelming gratitude mixed with exhaustion. They'd helped 217 children in the past year, provided emergency housing for 83, connected families with legal services, therapy, job training, but for every success story, there were a dozen kids they hadn't reached. Systems they couldn't change, bureaucracy that moved too slowly to save lives that needed saving now. It was never enough, but it was something. That night, Elena had dinner with Victor at his apartment. He'd actually cooked, not ordered takeout, some kind of pasta dish that was only slightly overcooked. "You look tired," he said, setting a plate in front of her. "I am tired, but it's the good kind." Elena took a bite. The pasta was edible. "This is better than last time. Margaret's been teaching me. She says if I'm going to have family over, I should feed them properly." "You consider me family now?" Victor looked at her, his expression serious. "Elena, you've been my daughter from the moment that DNA test came back. But yes, somewhere in the past year, we became family in a way that has nothing to do with blood." Elena's throat tightened. "I used to hate you, when I first found out what you did for a living, the criminal stuff. And now I understand it better. The world isn't black and white. You do illegal things, but you use that power to protect people the law can't or won't protect. It's not simple, but it's not evil either. That's probably the nicest thing anyone said about my life choices." They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then Victor set down his fork. "I'm getting out," he said. Elena looked up sharply. "Out of what?" "The business. The illegal operations. All of it." He met her eyes. "I've been transitioning things over the past few months, selling off assets, closing down operations, retiring. By the end of the year, Victor Moreau, the crime lord, will cease to exist." Elena's heart was pounding. "Why?" "Because I found something I care about more than money or power. I found you. And I found purpose in helping Louise's Place succeed." "Because," he smiled slightly. "Also because I'm getting too old for this. The stress is going to give me a heart attack." "What will you do instead?" "I was thinking about joining Louise's Place board of directors. If you'll have me. My business experience might actually be useful in a legitimate context." Elena started laughing, couldn't help it. The absurdity of a crime lord retiring to become a nonprofit board member was too much. "What?" Victor asked, but he was smiling too. "Nothing. It's just, my mother fell in love with a criminal, died trying to save children, and now her daughter is running a foundation funded partially by the compensation from the man who killed her, with a board that includes her former crime lord father. It's the most insane origin story ever." "Life's messy," Victor agreed, "but we work with what we're given. The Louisa's Place board voted unanimously to add Victor Moreau to their membership. He brought business acumen and connections that opened doors previously closed. Within 6 months, they'd expanded to include satellite offices in 2 other cities. Within a year, they were consulting with organizations across the country on best practices for trafficking survivor support. Elena finished her psychology degree and immediately started a master's program in social work. She hired more staff, built more programs, fought with city officials and federal agencies to change policies that harmed the kids they were trying to help. It was the hardest work she'd ever done. It was also the most meaningful. 2 years after Morrison's conviction, Elena got a letter from him. It had been screened by prison officials and forwarded through her lawyer, giving her the option to refuse it. She almost did, but curiosity won out. The letter was short, written in careful handwriting on lined paper. Elena, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I wanted you to know that I think about what I did every day. About your mother, about the children, about the lives I destroyed. I tell myself that I didn't know what I was doing, that circumstances made me who I became. But that's a lie. I knew exactly what I was doing. I just didn't care because other people's pain was less important than my own comfort. You cared. You fought. You built something good out of the worst thing I ever did. That doesn't absolve me, but it does give me something to think about besides my own guilt. I hope you're happy. I hope you found peace. You deserve both. James Morrison. Elena read the letter 3 times, then filed it away. She didn't respond. Morrison didn't deserve her words, her thoughts, her energy. He'd taken enough from her already. But she did think about it, about how people broke and how some of them stayed broken while others found ways to rebuild themselves into something different, about accountability and redemption and whether someone like Morrison could ever truly change. She didn't have answers, but she had her work, her father, her purpose. And that was enough. On a Friday afternoon, 3 years after Louisa's Place opened, Elena was in her office when Sarah knocked. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's important." Elena looked up from the grant proposal she was reviewing. "Who?" She wouldn't give her name, just said you'd remember her, said to tell you she's Amy's friend. Elena's blood ran cold. Amy's friend. Amy Reeves, the little girl Morrison had killed. The one who'd started everything when Louise tried to save her. She followed Sarah to the lobby. Standing by the window was a woman in her late 20s with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. When she turned around, Elena's breath caught. She knew this face, older now, but unmistakable. It was a face from her nightmares, from the dormitory at St. Catherine's. "Katie?" Elena whispered. The woman smiled, tears already streaming down her face. "You remember me." Katie Chen. She'd been 5 years old when she disappeared from St. Catherine's. Elena had been 7 and had spent weeks asking where Katie went until Sister Margaret slapped her hard enough to knock her down. Elena thought Katie was dead. Everyone from St. Catherine's was dead or scattered beyond finding. "How are you here?" Elena managed. "I was sold to a family in California. They told me I was adopted, that my parents had given me up. I believed that until I was 18 and found the sealed records." Katie's voice shook. "I saw the news coverage about Morrison's trial. Saw your name. I tried to find you, but you'd moved so many times. And then Louisa's Place opened, and I knew it had to be you." Elena crossed the lobby and pulled Katie into a hug. They stood there crying in the middle of the reception area while staff members tried not to stare. "I thought you were dead," Elena said. "I thought all of you were dead." "Some of us survived, not Amy. I heard what happened to her." Katie pulled back, wiping her eyes. "But there are others. I've been trying to find them, connect them. We have a support group now, Survivors of St. Catherine's. I came here to ask if you wanted to join." Elena had spent 3 years helping other trafficking survivors, but had never thought to look for the other children from her own past, the ones who'd shared her nightmare. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want to join." The support group met every other Tuesday in a church basement across town. There were 8 of them total, survivors of St. Catherine's who'd made it out alive and spent the intervening years rebuilding their lives. Some had been adopted like Katie. Some had aged out of foster care like Elena. One had been recovered in a raid 5 years earlier and spent the time since in therapy. They shared stories, compared memories, cried together over the ones who hadn't made it. And slowly, Elena realized she wasn't alone in a way she hadn't even known she was lonely. "We should do something," Katie said one night after the meeting. "Something to remember the ones we lost." "Like what?" asked Marcus Torres, a 30-year-old veteran who'd been at St. Catherine's until he was 6. "A memorial, maybe? Something that says their names, that proves they mattered." The idea took root. They spent months planning, fundraising, working with city officials. And on the 5th anniversary of Morrison's conviction, they unveiled a memorial in the park 3 blocks from where St. Catherine's had once stood. It was simple, a granite wall with 67 names carved into it. The confirmed victims, the children who hadn't survived, Amy Reeves, Tommy Patterson, Lisa Chen, 64 others whose names Elena read aloud at the dedication ceremony, her voice breaking on every syllable. The memorial was attended by hundreds of people, families of victims, other survivors, FBI agents who'd worked the case, and in the back, standing quietly apart from everyone else, Rachel Morrison. After the ceremony, Rachel approached Elena. "Thank you for including me," she said quietly. "You earned it. You've been part of this community for 3 years now. I'll never stop being his daughter." "No," Elena agreed, "but you're also so much more than that. You're Rachel Morrison, social worker in training. You're someone who shows up for kids who need you. You're someone who chose to be different." Rachel nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm applying to work here full-time after I graduate next year. If the offer still stands." "It stands. We need people like you." That night, Elena stood in front of her bathroom mirror, examining the face that looked back at her. 28 years old now, 5 years since she'd confronted Victor in a diner and started the chain of events that led here. She looked tired. She looked older than 28, but she also looked alive in a way she hadn't been before, like someone with purpose instead of someone just surviving. Her phone rang. "Victor, you did a good thing today," he said. "The memorial. Your mother would have loved it. I wish she could have been there." She was. In every name you read, in every person who came to remember. She started this when she tried to save Amy. You're just carrying it forward. After they hung up, Elena pulled out the box she kept hidden in her closet. Inside were the few things she'd saved from her old life. The ring, now on a chain around her neck instead of her finger. A photo of the diner where she'd met Victor. The letter from Morrison that she'd never answered. And at the bottom, a new addition. A photo from the memorial dedication. 8 survivors standing together, their arms around each other, all of them wearing buttons with Amy's face on them. They'd survived. They'd rebuilt. They'd turned their trauma into something that might prevent someone else's trauma. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even justice. Not really. But it was something. And Elena had learned that sometimes something was all you could ask for. She closed the box and put it back in the closet. Tomorrow, there would be more work. More kids who needed help. More systems to fight. More battles that couldn't be won but had to be fought anyway. But tonight, Elena let herself rest. Let herself feel the weight of what they'd accomplished and the lightness of not carrying it alone anymore. She was Elena Cross. She was Louise Martin's daughter. She was Victor Moreau's daughter. She was a survivor and an advocate and someone who'd learned to build light out of darkness. And for tonight, that was enough. The call came on a Tuesday morning 6 years after Morrison's conviction, while Elena was mediating a fight between 2 kids in the recreation room over whose turn it was on the Xbox. She almost didn't answer the unknown number, but something made her step into the hallway and pick up. "Is this Elena Cross?" The voice was male, professional, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Who's asking?" "My name is Anton Petrov. I'm an attorney representing the estate of Dmitry Volkov. I have information you need to hear." Elena's blood went cold. Volkov had been dead for 6 years. His estate had been liquidated, his assets distributed. There was no reason for his attorney to be calling her now. "I have nothing to say to anyone connected to Volkov." "Please, Miss Cross, 5 minutes of your time. I wouldn't call if it wasn't critical." Against her better judgment, Elena agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown the next day. She brought Victor and Marcus with her because she wasn't stupid enough to walk into potential danger alone. Petrov was waiting at a corner table, a slim briefcase beside him. He was maybe 50, with graying hair and the kind of careful posture that came from years of watching his back. When Victor sat down across from him, recognition flickered across Petrov's face. "Mr. Moreau, I wondered if you'd be here." "You have 2 minutes before we walk out," Victor said flatly. "Start talking." Petrov opened the briefcase and pulled out a folder. 6 years ago, Dmitry Volkov died in a fire at his estate. The official ruling was suicide, though I'm sure you both have your own theories about what really happened that day. Elena and Victor exchanged glances but said nothing. What you don't know is that Volkov anticipated his arrest. He knew the trafficking network was falling apart, knew Morrison would likely testify against him if given the chance, so he made arrangements. Petrov slid the folder across the table. He established a trust, $20 million, to be held for 6 years after his death and then distributed according to specific instructions. Elena opened the folder. Inside were legal documents dense with terminology she didn't fully understand, but one phrase jumped out at her. Elena Cross, primary beneficiary. "This is insane," she said. "Why would Volkov leave me anything? He didn't leave you money out of kindness. He left it with conditions." Petrov pulled out another document. "The full amount is to be paid to you personally, to do with as you wish. But there's a letter. He insisted you read it before accepting the funds." Victor grabbed the envelope before Elena could. "This could be a trap, psychological warfare from beyond the grave." "It could be," Petrov agreed. "But the money is real. The trust has been verified by 3 independent law firms, and Miss Cross is under no obligation to accept it or read the letter." But Volkov was very specific that she be given the choice. Elena took the envelope from Victor. Her hands were steady, though her heart was racing. "Can I take this with me? Read it privately?" "Of course. You have 30 days to make a decision. After that, the money defaults to Volkov's remaining relatives in Russia." They left the coffee shop with the folder and the letter. Elena didn't open it until that night, alone in her apartment with a glass of wine she didn't drink, and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The letter was handwritten, dated 3 days before Volkov's death. "Elena, if you're reading this, I'm dead. Probably by my own hand, possibly by someone else's. It doesn't matter. What matters is what I'm leaving you and why. I spent 40 years building an empire on the suffering of others. I told myself it was business, that the world was cruel, and I was simply taking advantage of that cruelty. But the truth is, I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew the children Morrison sold me were terrified. I knew the families I destroyed were real people with real pain. I just didn't care. Then you testified against Morrison. I was in that courtroom watching you, this young woman who'd survived hell and decided to fight back anyway. And something in your testimony broke through the armor I'd built. You said, I want to make sure no other child has to run the way I did. I realized that I was the reason children ran. I was the monster in their nightmares. This money can't undo what I did. Nothing can. But it can fund your work. It can save children I helped in danger. You don't have to take it. You don't have to forgive me. But if you're willing to accept blood money and turn it into something clean, it's yours. Use it to build more shelters. Use it to hire more staff. Use it to make sure Louise's place exists in every city where children are being hurt. Use it to win. I don't believe in redemption for people like me, but I believe in the possibility of doing one final thing that isn't completely evil. This is my attempt at that. Dmitry Volkov, Elena read the letter 4 times. Then she called Victor. He left me $20 million, she said when he answered. Volkov. He left it for Louise's place. Victor was silent for a long moment. What are you going to do? I don't know. Taking money from a trafficker feels wrong on every level, but turning down $20 million that could save hundreds of kids feels worse. There's no right answer here. I know. That's what makes it so hard. She spent the next week agonizing over the decision. She consulted with the Louise's Place Board, with Agent Chen, with the survivors group. Everyone had opinions. Some said taking the money was accepting dirty money, that it would taint everything they'd built. Others said that using Volkov's ill-gotten gains to destroy the very system he'd profited from was poetic justice. In the end, it was Rachel Morrison who helped Elena make the decision. My father hurt people, Rachel said during a late-night conversation in Elena's office. Nothing I do will change that. But I can choose to be different. I can take the legacy he gave me, the Morrison name, the guilt, the shame, and turn it into something that helps instead of hurts. This is different. This is actual money from trafficking. Is it? Or is it just money that used to belong to a trafficker and now has a chance to belong to something good? Rachel met Elena's eyes. You're not Volkov. You didn't earn this money through suffering, but you can use it to end suffering. Isn't that what matters? Elena accepted the money. She set up a separate foundation, the Volkov Redemption Fund, because she refused to pretend the money came from anywhere clean, with strict oversight and complete financial transparency. Every dollar would be tracked, every expenditure justified, every decision made by a board that included trafficking survivors. The first thing they funded was a national hotline for trafficking victims. The second was a training program for law enforcement on how to identify and support survivors. The third was expansion of Louise's place to 10 new cities. The press had a field day with it. Elena did interviews explaining her reasoning, defending her choice, enduring criticism from people who thought she'd sold out. But she also heard from survivors who said the new shelters had saved their lives, from parents who'd gotten their children back because of the hotline, from cops who'd rescued kids they wouldn't have known to look for without the training. The criticism hurt, but the lives saved mattered more. 2 years into managing the Volkov Fund, Elena got a call from a federal prison in Colorado. James Morrison was dying. Cancer, the warden explained. Stage 4. Spread to his liver and lungs. He has maybe 2 months left. He's asking to see you. Elena's first instinct was to refuse, but something made her pause. Why does he want to see me? He says he has information about other victims, children who were never recovered. He'll only talk to you. Elena discussed it with Victor, with her therapist, with the survivors group. Everyone said she didn't know Morrison anything, that seeing him would only hurt her. But if there were children still missing, still suffering, Elena couldn't ignore that. She flew to Colorado on a Thursday. The prison was gray and cold, exactly like every prison she'd seen in movies. Morrison was brought into a private meeting room in a wheelchair, his body wasted by disease. He looked nothing like the monster who'd haunted her nightmares. He looked like a dying old man. Elena, he said, his voice hoarse, thank you for coming. I'm not here for you. I'm here for the children you claim to have information about. Morrison nodded slowly. I kept records. Hidden records, names, locations, buyers. There are at least 30 children who were sold that the FBI never found. Where are these records? Buried on my property upstate. I'll tell you exactly where to dig. But first, I need you to understand something. Elena's jaw clenched. I don't need to understand anything from you. Please, just hear me out. Against her better judgment, Elena sat down. Morrison took a rattling breath. I was abused as a child. Sold, just like the kids at St. Catherine's. I spent 6 years being passed between buyers before I aged out and escaped. His hands shook in his lap. I told myself I was saving children by bringing them to St. Catherine's, that giving them food and shelter, even temporarily, was better than leaving them on the streets. You sold them. I did. Because somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing them as children and started seeing them as commodities, as things that had happened to me, so it was okay if they happened to someone else. Morrison's eyes were wet. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm trying to explain how someone becomes what I became, how pain turns into cruelty if you let it. Elena thought about this, about how easy it would have been for her to become bitter and cruel, how close she'd come to letting her trauma define her in the worst possible way. You had a choice, she said finally. Every single day you had a choice to be different, to break the cycle instead of perpetuating it. You chose wrong. I did. And I've had 6 years in here to understand that, to see what you've built with Louise's place, what you've done with your pain. Morrison's voice cracked. You became what I should have been. He gave her the location of the records, buried under an oak tree on property that had been seized by the government years ago. Elena left the prison without saying goodbye. The FBI excavated the site 3 days later and found exactly what Morrison had described, a waterproof container filled with files documenting trafficking transactions going back 15 years. The information led to the recovery of 14 children, now adults, who'd been sold and never reported missing because they'd already been written off by the system. Morrison died 2 weeks later. Elena didn't attend any service, didn't acknowledge his death publicly, but she did add 14 more names to the list of people Louise's Place had helped save. And she thought about his words, about how pain could turn into cruelty or compassion, depending on what you chose to do with it. 5 years after accepting the Volkov money, Louise's Place existed in 37 cities across the country. They'd helped over 2,000 children. The hotline had received more than 10,000 calls. The training program had been adopted by law enforcement agencies in 15 states. It still wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Elena was 35 now, her life nothing like the scared 23-year-old serving coffee at Murphy's Diner. She had a career she believed in, a father who loved her, a community of survivors who understood her in ways no one else could. She'd even started dating again, a teacher named David who worked with at-risk youth and didn't flinch when she woke up screaming from nightmares. On the 10th anniversary of Louise's Place, they held a gala fundraiser. Elena hated these events, the forced smiling, the small talk with wealthy donors, the feeling of performing her trauma for money. But they worked. The gala raised $3 million in a single night. Near the end of the evening, Victor found her on the balcony escaping the crowd. "You did good in there," he said, handing her a glass of champagne. "I feel like a trained SEAL. Look at the survivor. Watch her beg for money to save other survivors. You're giving people a chance to be part of something meaningful. That's not begging. That's leadership." Elena sipped the champagne. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd never confronted you that night? If I'd just kept my head down and ignored the ring?" "All the time. But I try not to dwell on alternate histories. We got lucky. We found each other." "Lucky," Elena repeated. "My mother was murdered. I spent 20 years alone. Morrison destroyed hundreds of lives. That's the foundation we built this on. Doesn't feel lucky." "No," Victor agreed. "But what you've built from that foundation, Louise's Place, the Volkov Fund, the lives you've saved, that's not luck. That's choice. You chose to fight. That matters." Rachel Morrison appeared in the balcony doorway. She was 25 now, with a master's degree in social work and 3 years of full-time work at Louise's Place under her belt. She'd become one of their best counselors, specializing in kids who'd been betrayed by parental figures. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's someone here who wants to meet you both, says it's important." Back inside, a woman in her 40s was waiting near the bar. She had dark hair streaked with gray and eyes that held the kind of wariness that never fully left trauma survivors. "Elena Cross?" the woman asked. "My name is Jennifer Patterson. My brother was Tommy. He was at St. Catherine's." Elena remembered Tommy, a quiet boy with red hair who disappeared when Elena was 7, one of the 67 names on the memorial. "I'm so sorry about your brother," Elena said. "I've spent 30 years looking for him. I was 18 when he was taken. Our mother had died. I was trying to get custody, but the state moved faster. Put him in St. Catherine's while the paperwork went through." Jennifer's voice shook. "Then he vanished. They told me he'd been adopted, but they couldn't tell me where. I've been searching ever since. I wish I had better news, but Tommy didn't survive. Morrison confirmed it during his trial." "I know. I read the transcripts." Jennifer wiped her eyes. "But I also read about what you've built here. And I wanted to meet the woman who made sure my brother's death meant something, who made sure other kids wouldn't disappear the way he did." They talked for an hour. Jennifer shared memories of Tommy, how he'd loved dinosaurs, how he'd been terrified of thunderstorms, how he'd cried when their mother died. Elena shared what little she remembered of him from St. Catherine's. It wasn't much, but it was something. Proof that Tommy had existed, that he'd mattered to more than just his sister. Before Jennifer left, she pressed a check into Elena's hand. $50,000. "I can't accept this, Elena said. "Yes, you can. I've spent 30 years searching for my brother. That search is over, but this..." She gestured around the gala, at Louise's Place, at everything they'd built. "This keeps going. Keep fighting for them. All of them." Elena added the check to the night's fundraising total. $3,050,000. Enough to open 2 more locations and expand their legal advocacy program. Enough to keep fighting. Katie Chen found Elena near the end of the night. She'd become Louise's Place's Director of Survivor Services, using her own experience to shape programs that actually helped, instead of just checking bureaucratic boxes. "I have news," Katie said, her expression cautious. "We found another one, another survivor from St. Catherine's." Elena's heart leaped. "Who?" "Her name is Maria Sanchez. She was 4 when she was taken, sold to a family in Mexico. She managed to escape 5 years ago and has been trying to piece together her past. Someone told her about the memorial, about Louise's place. She wants to come home." "When?" "Next week. I'm flying down to help her cross the border legally, get her set up with documentation. She'll need housing, therapy, probably medical care." Katie paused. "I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to meet with her. She knows your story. She specifically asked to meet you." "Of course. Whatever she needs." Maria arrived on a Tuesday, small and nervous and carrying everything she owned in a single backpack. She was 31 but looked younger, with dark eyes that darted around Louise's place like she expected someone to drag her away at any moment. Elena met her in the quiet room, a space they'd designed specifically for intake meetings, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture and no windows that looked out on the street. "Maria, I'm Elena. Welcome home." Maria stared at her for a long moment. Then she started crying. "I thought I was the only one left," she whispered. "I thought everyone else was dead." "No, there are 9 of us now, 9 survivors from St. Catherine's. You're not alone." They sat together while Maria cried out years of fear and isolation. Elena didn't try to fix it, didn't offer empty platitudes. She just sat with this pain, the way she'd learned to do with hundreds of other survivors over the years. Eventually, Maria's tears slowed. "I want to help," she said. "However I can. I want to make sure no other kid goes through what we did. Then you will. Once you're ready, once you've had time to heal, we'll find a place for you. But right now, your job is just to be safe. That's enough." Maria joined the survivors group. She started therapy. She got a job in Louise's Place's kitchen, cooking meals for the kids in emergency housing. It was simple work, but it gave her purpose, gave her a reason to wake up every morning. And watching her heal, watching her rebuild, reminded Elena why this work mattered. On a cold November morning 12 years after Morrison's conviction, Elena stood at her mother's grave with Victor beside her. They'd started coming here every year on the anniversary of Louise's death, not to mourn, though there was still grief, but to report, to tell Louise what they'd accomplished in her name. "We're up to 42 locations now," Elena said, kneeling to place fresh flowers on the headstone. "Last year we helped 3,000 kids. The federal government is using our training model nationwide. And next month we're opening an international branch in Mexico to help kids who get trafficked across the border." She paused, touching the cold granite. "I think you'd be proud. I think you'd approve of what we've built. And I hope—" Her voice cracked slightly. "I hope you know that none of this would exist if you hadn't been brave enough to try to save Amy. Your death wasn't meaningless. It started everything." Victor placed his own flowers beside Elena's. "I never got to tell you I loved you before you died. Never got to know our daughter together. But I'm trying to be the father she deserves. I'm trying to protect the children you died trying to save. I hope that counts for something." They stood in silence for a long time. Then Victor's phone buzzed. He checked it, and his expression shifted. That was Agent Chen. The last person connected to St. Catherine's trafficking network was just arrested in Argentina. That's everyone. Every single person involved is either dead or in custody. Elena absorbed this. 12 years of fighting, of hunting down leads, of working with international agencies. And now it was done. The network that had destroyed her childhood was finally, completely dismantled. "How do you feel?" Victor asked. "Tired," Elena admitted. "Relieved, but also like, what now? This has been my focus for so long. What do I do when the fight is over?" "The fight's not over. It's just changing. There are still kids who need Louise's place, still systems that need fixing. You're not done yet." He was right. The specific network that had hurt her was gone, but trafficking still existed, Children still suffered. The work would never truly be done. But this chapter was finished. And maybe that was enough. That night, Elena gathered the survivors group for a special meeting. All 9 of them now. Elena, Katie, Marcus Torres, and 6 others they'd found over the years. They met in Louise's place conference room, the space where they'd shared so many tears and triumphs. The last person connected to St. Catherine's trafficking was arrested today, Elena announced. It's over. The network is completely dismantled. The room erupted. People crying, hugging, laughing with the kind of relief that came from finally being able to breathe after holding it in for years. What happens now? Asked Marcus Torres. Now we keep going. We keep helping kids. We keep fighting trafficking wherever we find it. But we do it knowing that the specific people who hurt us can't hurt anyone else. Elena looked around the room at these people who'd become family. And we do it together. Katie raised her glass of water. To surviving, they echoed. And to thriving, Elena added, because we're not just survivors anymore. We're advocates. We're healers. We're proof that trauma doesn't have to define you. They stayed late that night, sharing stories and memories. Rachel Morrison was there too. She'd been adopted into the group over the years, despite not being a St. Catherine's survivor. She belonged because she understood what it meant to carry a legacy of pain and choose to transform it. As the meeting wound down, Katie pulled Elena aside. "I've been offered a job," she said, heading up anti-trafficking operations for an international NGO. It would mean leaving Louise's place. Elena's heart sank, but she forced a smile. "That's amazing. You should take it." "I wanted to ask you first. You gave me this community, this purpose. I don't want to abandon it." "You're not abandoning anything. You're expanding the fight. That's exactly what we need." Elena hugged her. "I'm proud of you, and I'm grateful that we found each other again." Katie left for Geneva 3 months later. Rachel was promoted to Director of Survivor Services to replace her. Maria Sanchez completed her training and became a counselor. The community kept growing, kept evolving, kept saving lives. And Elena kept leading, kept fighting, kept believing that the work mattered even when it felt impossible. On her 40th birthday, David proposed. They'd been together for 6 years by then, long enough for him to understand her nightmares and her crusade and her inability to ever fully turn off the part of her brain that worried about vulnerable children. They married in a small ceremony at Louise's place, surrounded by staff and survivors and the families they'd helped. Victor walked her down the aisle. Katie flew in from Geneva to be maid of honor. Rachel gave a toast about how Elena had taught her that your parents' choices didn't have to define your future. Elena wore her mother's ring on a chain around her neck, tucked beneath her dress, a reminder of where she'd come from and why she fought. The following year, she and David had a daughter. They named her Louise. Holding that tiny baby in her arms, Elena finally understood what her mother must have felt. That fierce, overwhelming need to protect, that willingness to sacrifice anything to keep this child safe. "Your grandmother died trying to save children she didn't even know," Elena whispered to baby Louise one night while David slept. "She was brave and good, and the world killed her for it. But because she tried, because she refused to look away, hundreds of other children got saved. Your grandfather and I made sure of that." She kissed her daughter's forehead. "I'm going to teach you to be brave like her, but I'm also going to teach you to be smart, to fight without destroying yourself, to understand that you can't save everyone, but that trying anyway is what makes us human." Baby Louise yawned and fell asleep, oblivious to the weight of the legacy she'd been born into. 5 years later, Louise's place was operating in all 50 states and 12 countries. They'd helped over 15,000 children. The Volkov Redemption Fund had distributed over $100 million to anti-trafficking organizations worldwide. The survivor support group had grown to 37 members, all of them thriving in different ways. Morrison had been dead for 8 years. Volkov for 13. St. Catherine's had been demolished and turned into a park. The memorial to the victims had become a pilgrimage site for trafficking survivors and their families. Elena was 45 now, with gray starting to thread through her dark hair and lines around her eyes from smiling more than she'd ever thought possible. She'd written 2 books about her experience and the work of Louise's place. She spoke at conferences, testified before Congress, advised law enforcement agencies on survivor-centered approaches. But her favorite part of every week was still Tuesday mornings, when she volunteered in the children's playroom at Louise's Place's main location, when she could sit with scared kids and tell them they were safe, that someone cared, that surviving was possible. On a Tuesday in late spring, a little girl arrived at Louise's Place. She was 8 years old, skinny and terrified, with bruises on her arms and fear in her eyes. She'd been recovered from a trafficking operation 3 states away and had no family to return to. Elena sat with her in the quiet room while the intake coordinator handled paperwork. "What's your name?" Elena asked gently. "Sophie," the girl whispered. "Hi, Sophie. I'm Elena. Do you know where you are?" Sophie shook her head. "You're at a place called Louise's Place. It's somewhere safe, somewhere you can stay until we figure out what happens next." Elena crouched down to Sophie's eye level. "I know you're scared. I was scared too when I was your age. Bad things happened to me, just like bad things happened to you." Sophie's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really. But I survived, and now I help other kids survive too. That's what this place is for." "What happened to the people who hurt you?" "They went to prison. They can't hurt anyone anymore." Elena pulled the chain from beneath her shirt, showing Sophie the silver ring. "My mom gave me this before she died. She died trying to protect kids like you. And now I keep it to remind me why I do this work." Sophie stared at the ring. "My mom's dead too." "I'm sorry, that's really hard. Everyone says I should be brave, but I don't feel brave. I'm scared all the time." Elena sat beside her. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you keep going even when you are scared. And you know what? You're already being brave. You survived. You're here. That takes courage." Sophie leaned against Elena's shoulder, this tiny girl carrying weight no child should have to carry, and Elena sat with her the way someone should have sat with her when she was young and scared and alone. This was the work. Not the galas or the speeches or the policy changes, though those mattered. This. Sitting with broken children and showing them that broken didn't mean destroyed, that healing was possible, that they deserved better than what they'd gotten. Sophie stayed at Louise's Place for 6 months. Elena visited her twice a week, watching her slowly come back to life, teaching her that safety could be trusted, that adults could be kind, that the future didn't have to look like the past. Eventually, Sophie was placed with a foster family who'd been trained by Louise's Place staff in trauma-informed care. She cried when she left, clutching a stuffed bear Elena had given her. "Will I see you again?" Sophie asked. "Whenever you want. You're part of our family now. We don't forget our family." 2 years later, Sophie returned to Louise's Place for a visit. She was 10 now, thriving in school, talking about maybe becoming a counselor when she grew up, so she could help other kids like her. Elena watched her play with the current residents and felt something settle in her chest, something that might have been peace. She'd spent 23 years searching for where she belonged, spent another 20 building something that gave other lost children a place to belong to. It hadn't fixed everything. Trafficking still existed. Children still suffered. The world was still full of monsters who hurt the vulnerable. But it was also full of people who fought back, people who chose compassion over cruelty, people who survived trauma and decided to use that survival to protect others. That night, Elena sat at her kitchen table with Victor, David, and 6-year-old Louise. They were having dinner, pasta with red sauce that Louise had helped make, bread from the bakery down the street, salad that nobody was eating. "Grandpa," little Louise asked, "Mommy said you used to be bad. Is that true?" Victor nearly choked on his wine. "Your mother has a very loose definition of discretion. I want her to know the truth," Elena said calmly, "that people are complicated, that bad choices don't have to define your whole life." "I made mistakes," Victor told his granddaughter carefully. "I did things I'm not proud of, but I'm trying to do better now. That's all any of us can do. Acknowledge when we've done wrong and try to do better. Like how Mommy helps kids because bad people hurt her when she was little." Exactly like that. Louise considered this. "When I grow up, I want to help kids too." Elena's throat tightened. "Then we'll teach you how." After dinner, after Louise was in bed, Elena stood at her window looking out at the city lights. Victor joined her, both of them quiet for a long moment. "Do you think Louise would be proud?" Elena asked. "My mother. Do you think she'd approve of what we built?" "I know she would. She died trying to save one child. You've saved thousands." "That's her legacy." "It's our legacy," Elena corrected. "Yours, mine, everyone who's been part of Louise's place. We built this together." "We did. But you were the catalyst. You were the one who refused to let the pain win." Elena touched the ring beneath her shirt. "Someone once told me that pain can turn into cruelty or compassion, depending on what you choose. I chose compassion. That's the only thing that separates me from Morrison, from Volkov, from all the people who hurt us. They chose cruelty. I chose differently, and that choice mattered." "Yeah," Elena said, watching the city breathe beneath them. "Yeah, it did." 27 years after Louise Martin died trying to save a child. 22 years after Elena Cross confronted a stranger about a ring and discovered she wasn't alone. 17 years after Morrison was convicted. 12 years after Louise's place opened its doors. The work continued. The fight continued. But so did the healing. So did the hope. Elena Cross had been stolen as a child, raised in trauma, and spent years surviving on nothing but stubborn will. But she'd also been found. She'd also been loved. She'd also learned that the worst thing that happened to you didn't have to be the last thing that defined you. She'd turned pain into purpose, trauma into transformation, loss into legacy. And in doing so, she'd proven something Louise Martin had believed 27 years ago when she tried to save Amy Reeves, that one person caring, one person fighting, one person refusing to look away could change everything. The scars remained. They always would. But they were proof of survival, not evidence of defeat. And that, Elena had finally learned, was enough.